And we're never gonna get you guys out of here until we get started.
Teacher's coming out 3 days on the way through. It's there.
Yes. I'm gonna call the city council work session to order and let's call roll.
Mayor Van Gordon.
Here.
Counselor Weber. Here. Counselor Doyle. Here. Counselor Stout. Counselor Blackwell. Here. Counselor Moak. Here. Counselor Rockley.
Here, even in a different order. I think I got us all.
Councilman around.
How am I supposed to?
Saturday morning, sorry.
And we're never gonna survive. Thanks for coming in on a Saturday. And if you feel like you were just here, it's because you were. So let's get started. Turn it over to our wonderful facilitator who's on year 3 with us.
Three, I think, yeah, year 3 with you all. So thank you for having me back. Again, my name is Cheryl. I know I don't have a name tag, but I am here to kind of just help move things along, keep with the agenda, and we have a jam-packed agenda. We have a lot to go over, and I know we have a hard stop at 1. So what we have is we're going to start off with going over some of the projects and priorities. We're going to review and prioritize any of the future projects. That will take up a significant portion of our morning. We'll do a brief conversation around the mayor's task force, and then we will talk about some resource constraint projects. So, and then we will have a scheduled break shortly after that too, but we want to keep everything moving along. So everybody, I believe, has in front of them, and we can also put it on the screen if that's easier, a list of the retreat priorities for 2024. And we're going to start by discussing really first any clarification needed on any of these projects. Then we'll get into some updates and then discuss any changes that anybody is wanting to propose or suggest.
Cheryl, just a quick one. What level do you want most of this conversation to take place? Are we talking 50,000, 1,000, like nitty gritty? What's the most constructive for this conversation?
That is an excellent question. Any insights into where you want it? It's typically higher, but
Yeah, the best thing for us to do is keep it about like the 50,000 foot level. The way to think about this retreat is it's a lot about sharing information to make sure we're, walking around out of here with kind of the same set of facts. Also discussing questions that we have as far as our role to sort of implement these, right? Because we sit on a ton of boards, we advocate, in a lot of different ways. So we all need to be kind of rowing together here. And the third thing is questions and comments and kind of general direction here. This document is going to be used to really kind of frame out the next year, like from, as kind of Nancy's marching orders, if you will. Did I miss anything?
No, this is your time to review this list. Some of these things are going to naturally fall off, because like for the IMER, Lane County has already moved forward with that. What we were discussing as the general fund imbalance last year is now pivoted to the mayor's task force. So, making those changes, and then really, for me, it's just affirming, is this our list? Because I think one of the agreements that we came to last year, Councilor Stout, was that I do the analogy of my closet. I have way too many clothes. So if I buy something new, something comes off. So is that idea of resource capacity with, and if you want to add a large initiative or any initiative really, because some of these are larger than others, then, we have to have a discussion about what goes to the back burner or what we wait on.
good question. So is there any of the sections that are standing out to anybody right now, or would you benefit from a minute or two to kind of review the whole list?
Are we gonna go through each chunk or are we just gonna call stuff out?
I wanted to start first by just asking if there was a pressing hot topic in one of the sections. If not, we will just kind of go through each and just see, is there any clarification? Yes.
With the 42nd Street levy, is that something that, when is the analysis due on that? And is that something we're going to be looking at over this next year?
Yeah, the 42nd Street levy is on schedule, the analysis that you're talking about. It'll be part of the United Front federal request again this year. So it's moving forward. I think last year we talked a little bit about the 42nd Street overlay, which happened. So yeah, it's on schedule.
And Neil, if I'm thinking ahead towards, we're gonna have to do something to that levy, right? So the Corps is gonna come back, we're gonna do kind of, and we'll get that information this year. And then hopefully that's gonna be the thing that's gonna turn into the big federal, like the big federal ask.
The $40 million ask, yeah.
Right, so I'm gonna guess, Beth, that ask is probably 26, 27, somewhere
So I
in
was
there,
thinking that
depending on.
a ways out. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other immediate ones standing out? Okay, well, let's start with the first group. We have governance and financial sustainability. Let's start with fire governance. Anything on that?
Hopefully.
Go Steve.
I've been encouraging resistance to that because the turmoil out there and funding for fire. I think we're talking about fire department.
Yes.
I don't know what we're gonna get, but we need to work hard to get what we need from our city. Right now, they're not trying to give it to the Soviet regime.
When you say you're encouraging resistance, what does that mean? I want to know where you're,
A nice way of saying no.
like, you don't want us to move forward with the current fire
No.
governance or?
No, it's not. What they're proposing is not for anything.
It's really hard to understand when you read through the packet, the governance packet, about what the cost is gonna be, because there's no hard
Because
numbers.
we're still waiting for that's the part where we're stuck.
Yeah, so it's really hard to kind of come up with, feel like a decision on that when you don't really know what the actual cost is gonna be for each jurisdiction. That's how I felt when I read through it.
Encouraging resistance.
this
I can't
kind of
believe
vague.
you said that.
Yeah.
It's early in the
Feel to
Saturday.
you to say that when you're sitting next to me. I'm like, what do you mean by that?
So, go ahead, Mary. I was just gonna say, this isn't necessarily fire governance, but it's related, kind of adjacent. The area that we can control is the fire levy. That, the mayor talked about it, state of the city, that we know we need to go to the voters in November and making a determination on what amount we want to do with that. And that hopefully will be something that the task force will talk about and address and give some guidance on.
You said the fire levy. No, they want us to commit to bringing.
Oh, I know, but it's,
Which
But-
we already are functionally merged. It's just getting.
And this might be a weird question, but how does the levy play into if it changes to a fire governance?
That's part of the part.
that would be part of the conversation, but I think that even if there was some kind of decision made like within the next couple months about, which I doubt, about fire governance, it will take a while to determine how that gets structured. And in the meantime, if we don't do something about our levy, it will just expire. So I don't want to take that risk that
We have
something.
42nd Street levy and fire levies.
Different levies.
They're different
confusing.
levies and they're
Yeah.
spelled different. Yeah.
Maybe we should say levy. I don't know.
Well, and I think the wrinkle for the fire governance conversation is the county's got a desire to have an ambulance task force as well.
That's what I wanted to bring up.
For Christ's
Does that
sake.
fit on here?
We've been going on and on and on about this for years. It's like, this is a perfect example of why people hate government, is because this fire thing has been going on for years. And those poor firefighters are just stuck in a loop. And I just wish people would make a decision and go with it instead of this whole it just sucks to hear about this year after year and it's not getting taken care of. It just blows.
And I agree, like, whatever we get to as an answer, like, we've got to get to it as an answer so we can put a bow on it.
Exactly.
And like, this is what the game plan is. And I will tell you what, I've told some of the county commissioners is until we get to an answer on fire governance, I don't think we're gonna have bandwidth to participate in an ambulance task force, right? Because the same
Right.
people that we would rely on to talk about ambulances are the same people that are going to fire governance committee right now.
So can I jump in on this?
This is why we're having this conversation on a
Yes,
Saturday.
and this was my piece to when we talked about this, is figuring out where this ambulance task force fits into it. My understanding from what I saw at the board of commissioner meeting is that they're really only pausing creating this ambulance task force until like June or July. That might have been what Eve said.
Yeah.
And also my understanding, and you may know more about this than I do, is I heard her say that it was the fire chiefs were gonna be recommending the people to sit on that. She didn't say that the municipalities were gonna be picking somebody. So my little ears perked up and I was like, okay, what does that look like? And the other thing that that county was stressing is that they feel, or maybe it's true, that they have they are mandated to provide ambulance service countywide. So trying to figure out, how is it that we make decisions about how we fund our ambulance as part of ESF, when the county is now saying, well, this is our purview and we're gonna move forward with this, but they're gonna pause, thinking that we're gonna get this fire governance over the finish line by June. So
So,
you might know more than me.
Yeah, so I think we take it down to levels and maybe Nancy, you can clarify, like.
Yep.
The fire chief's not choosing what elected official goes to
No.
the, okay. So we know that one.
Yay, because I was like, wait, I'm gonna play this back. Like, what am I hearing?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a. Like that may turn into them sending a note to Nancy saying, hey, can you guys tell me your name? So then the other piece, and maybe Nancy, you can help us with this, is. Where exactly is the fire governance piece? Because the committee's not met in a while. I know the city managers have it. I think you guys need some more time, but if we just play this out in the next year, like when do we get to kind of a framing of an answer?
Right now, you're right about the report. It doesn't do a deep dive into the number aspect of it. And, you know, there's the cultural part that's happening in the department. Because I think there's especially some long-term firefighters that were told like, oh, we're gonna do this functional consolidation and then we will have a district. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think a lot of people believe that. And it doesn't really matter what they were told, but I think that's kind of a belief. So it's like, on the Eugene side, I know they're doing a very deep dive into can a district work in Eugene? What would the rate be? I don't want to presuppose an outcome, but I sort of feel like, at least in Springfield, it probably wouldn't, because we don't have the same assessed value. A lot of our properties are already in compression. You know, I don't think the math works. But here's the other, you know, I haven't had the fire union approach me and say, here's the assumptions we're making when we talk about a fire district. Because if they are saying, oh, we want to create a district, but cities, we want you to continue to give us general fund, that's not gonna fly. I'm not gonna do that. So, if you're gonna pursue that, then you need to figure out a rate where you can stand on your own. And I don't know if that message has really,
I don't disagree with you on that.
I don't know if that's really hit home. So, I think it will take also, this isn't my decision. You know, this is an elected official decision. It's a policy decision. I don't have that kind of authority. I don't know, maybe Sarah could in Eugene, I don't, because she has a broader base of authority, but as a administrator, I think that you have to kind of have the elected officials bless whatever decision you want to do. I mean, that's why we've had Councilor Moe and Councilor Rodley sitting at these meetings. So I want to give Eugene time to be able to crunch their numbers, because I know for sure if it doesn't work for Eugene, it darn sure won't work for us. So I'm not gonna have our finance staff really chasing that, since we're doing other stuff that they're at capacity. So that's where we are right now, presently.
So figuring out how that ambulance task force, because that is, there has been chat about making an ambulance district, which would then also be like this countywide thing. So however we weave that in, I think that's gonna be part of it.
So maybe we could do, and I'm kind of looking at people to see, see if this works for them. Maybe we can do a couple of things. It's like, Nancy, maybe you can get us kind of the dates roughly when this is gonna, when do we think Eugene's gonna be? How much more time do the city managers need? When is the committee gonna meet again to kind of actually flesh out because at some point we're gonna have to meet with our colleagues in Eugene in a big meeting to figure this out.
Yeah.
And then once we have that, maybe we communicate an updated date to the county when we would be available. I don't know if June works or not, because I don't know what the date is, but I don't see until we know the answer to the governance question, I don't see that there's any reasonable way that we're gonna be able to take on, a big conversation about ambulance.
Yes, and, a couple of pieces. One, Brenda and Elcog are gonna be facilitating that ambulance task force too. And if we're not a part of that conversation and it moves on, and you and I have talked about this, and I've talked about this with many people, I think that will directly impact the fire governance discussion. That's just what I'm gonna say. It's like, I think that's gonna be a challenge. So somehow if we can like move things along so that they don't move forward before we get to some sort of decision.
Yeah, my sense is that Eugene's not gonna have capacity either, and when I talk to the county, the feeling I get is if we push them a quarter, it wouldn't be a concern. If we told them we're not ready to participate for 4 years, right?
That would be a concern.
Yeah.
Because it's really being driven by rural,
Crestwell.
Oak Ridge.
Oak Ridge.
Yeah,
Oak Ridge,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
Being driven by rural needs, so.
The governance.
The
No,
ambulance
the
Or
piece.
the ambulance piece.
So you've got two distinct components, and this is where it's gonna get kind of confusing, is we've got this conversation about we functionally merged in, oh wait, what do we do? Right, and how do we direct the city managers? And then you've got the county coming back and wanting to form a countywide district to fund ambulances because, well, that's probably another 5 hours on a Saturday to explain the mess that ambulances are. But I think they inform each other.
Well, I think the county counties have a responsibility as a public health authority.
Mhm.
So I don't think they necessarily want to. I think they realize
Mm.
if Oak Ridge bows out, it falls to them as a public health authority.
So with fire governance, anything else we need to get? We have like 26 of these to go through.
Just move forward.
Yeah.
Move forward.
We talked
Two
about this all
comments
day,
on
so.
fire governance is just that, in talking to the chief and other firefighters, just clarity is kind. And that ultimately, whatever decision we do make, if we give them a lot of clarity, that's going to be better received than not a lot of clarity, even if it's not the option they hope for. And the second thing is, if we do decide to ultimately say, we're going to split up the departments, which is one of the options, not the only option, I'm not saying it has to be that way, just saying like that, if we do decide that, making sure we have a really clear plan for them going forward. And that if we do decide to go that direction, making sure that they don't have a funding source that is constantly in limbo and depending on the caprice of the voters.
Yeah.
So that they feel, whether it's, for example, the payroll tax, like, a public safety payroll tax or something like that. Just making sure there's something in place so that they're not worried about it and they have clarity on what they need. That's all.
Yeah, I think that, we're gonna have to rely on the staff that is staffing us to really be clear with the firefighters that we've got to get to some sort of answer and we got to say what the plan is, right? We're not just trying to run out the clock on them. We're this is complex and we're trying to do it in a reasonable way. Are people good on fire governance? Good. All
All
right,
right.
26 more of these to go.
One down. General fund imbalance.
Actually, I would think maybe we skip this one because we're gonna talk about this, right?
It's the mayor's task force.
On the task force, perfect. Okay, how about local option levies?
We're not gonna do them this year? Don't know.
Well, the one coming up.
It's November.
Is November, and the question at hand is that levy is currently 38 cents. And if it does not pay for the full cost of a fire station, full cost would be 54 cents in today's money. Of course, with levies it's a stagnant amount, it doesn't adjust for inflation. So, I mentioned it briefly to the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force, and I hope they take that up as maybe that would be some nice political coverage for you all to be going, hey, we think you should ask voters for the full freight of that station. I think the firefighters would probably, I can't speak for them, but I think they would be supportive of that.
And the police levy is not due again until what, 26 or 27?
I think it's 27, but we'd have to start in 26.
Okay, so we won't have to deal with that one this year. Does anybody have questions about the fire levy?
Yeah, isn't there, in terms of like the compression, is there capacity to do the 54 cents? That's what I would do.
Yeah, and that's a good question because compression happens by property.
Right.
So I was in my mind, I'm like, how hard would it be to try to figure out, some sort of a swag number about what compression looks like for us in our city? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but
Okay, I thought it was like a percentage. It could only be like a max percentage of the property tax that could go towards these type of levies and taxes.
It's a fixed rate. It's $10.
it's, $10 towards
Yeah,
general
okay.
government. But again, it's by parcel. So like one property might be at compression and others might not.
Oh, interesting. Oh, huh.
Depending on what different districts they're in.
Districts.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
like what are their water district? What is their, yeah.
Is there a relationship between the fire levy and the fire governance conversation?
So, and I think in probably May, we're gonna have a couple work sessions on the fire levy, and that's gonna be where we choose the rate. We talk about the ballot language and all of that kind of stuff. But if you think about it, if we're gonna put it out in November, we'd be doing that work right before we go out on break.
Anything else on this one? Urban renewal districts.
I think we could maybe punt that to when we talk about CETA, but
And IMERF.
Everybody's
Close
everybody's favorite.
Which is now Clean Lane, but
Oh,
yes, I think it can fall off until it like comes back.
The only question why I think we want to keep tracking this is there was a conversation at the board meeting last week about somehow Springfield not paying into the IMER.
Mhm.
I think it's something I'm not sure this is an issue right now, but I think we just continue to track it.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the rates that Springfield will be charged and Santa Pac will be charged as we go forward, as well as our disposal choices. Obviously, there's the political, what's good for the society choice, but I'm very concerned that we might get into a position that our hands are tied behind our back.
My understanding is all our waste is being hauled to Jackson County right now. And this is just my opinion, is that where Santa Pac hauls its waste, like we have a one franchise agreement, like that's an internal business practice of the people we contract with. And I think we continue to maybe watch this, not, talk about it every year, but because there could be policy questions that come out of it.
The next bullet point, do you want to hold that for the CETA conversation or is it separate?
There's a specific conversation about this coming.
Yep.
Okay,
And then state mandates.
we're not gonna do any this year.
That was what we tried to tell them. We tried to tell them.
It doesn't work
Please
that
do
way.
none.
We decline.
Respectfully. I said respectfully at the front.
Unless there's a whole lot of money that comes with it.
I have a question on the state mandates. I think Nancy, this is for you. How much more work is left to be done based on the last round of state mandates before we would say, hey, we are fully in compliance with state mandates? Because it was a slog being on the planning commission day in and day out, hearing constant state mandates, and all the waste of staff time.
I think that
Pardon me, that was charged.
No, it's a real question, and part of it was just like some sweeping, like, okay, we're eliminating all these requirements around planning, so we can have middle housing, so that it doesn't take a ton of staff time because it's like, it doesn't exist now, we can't require certain things. But CFEC is certainly still chewing up time, and, so, I look at it as we're not able to do other things because we have these mandates. I mean, I think probably the biggest impact on us is we can't redeploy resources to do more like long-term comprehensive planning because we're constantly getting barraged with these things. So I don't know if there's an endpoint. I don't know if Neil knows.
We'll never be there. I mean, a lot of the work we do in the legislature is just to try to keep what we have and keep it from turning into another mandate that we can barely
Right.
reach. But I know planning is going to be coming to you with the housing mandates from the state and how challenging just those are gonna be for the city of Springfield to reach. And there will be new mandates out of this legislature. So it's kind of a constant.
On just on a risk level, if we slow pedal the implementation of any of these mandates, and again, I'm not debating the goodness or badness of these mandates, just on the pure economics of staff time. What is the liability to the city if we just say, hey, we just don't have capacity to do that? We're only the 9th largest city in Oregon. We're not 1 through 5. We only have this much staff time to appropriate to that. I'm only just thinking about that, especially because we have some budget shortfalls. So I'm just kind of curious, hey, what is our maximum liability if we're just slow to implement some of these things?
Yeah, I think that the city could put its comprehensive plan or plans that are already acknowledged at risk. Now, granted, that's a long process if the state were to try and say that you're out of compliance and whatever enforcement they would take. I think you also have the risk that citizen groups or advocates could take the city, could sue the city like with a writ to say, hey, you're mandated to do this and you're not doing it. And I, frankly, it's a slow process anyway, right? I mean, as you talked about, kind of slow walking it, it's not like it's gonna be fast. But those would be the 2 legal risks that I can think of.
The other thing we watch for is if we don't do anything on some of these, then we just do what the state gets to tell us. Here's how you.
Yeah,
move
just
forward.
sometimes you lose your
And
discretion.
so council has typically been like, let's do the work to make sure Springfield represents Springfield. We may just be getting to the point where there's too many.
And I think, and I frankly would argue with the level of staff that we have right now, we probably are slow walking it, like, yeah. And that's not a reflection on the work the staff's doing, that's just like the physics of how many people that we've got right now. And I think we continue to tie this back to what our legislative advocacy is, right? Our going position as a city is, please don't ask us to do more.
Yeah.
We still haven't caught up with stuff you asked us to do pre-pandemic. And I think we just have to consistently be telling our legislators that.
When I was on the planning commission, I recommended several times, we take a document, remove every other page. Would anybody care?
But I think this would be a good point for, when we get into budget committee is just have the staff just answer the question, like, how many people are we spending, right? Like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Those are the people that could be working on our North Gateway area.
Yeah.
Some of the other areas that we have, but us knowing that number so we can keep telling our partners would be really helpful.
Yep.
Is it 5 people? Is it 3 people? I don't know, but to give context to people who are in our delegation.
And I think one of the exciting things, just to, talk about the staff and our council about Springfield, is that so many of the goals of CFEC are implemented by the collective will of what we have here. Like, just, we all want clean air, we all want fresh water, and we frankly want people to have to drive less. And so, like, I'm just looking at what our overall will as a council is. I don't see those are inimical to what the state is requiring. And so in a sense, not that I want to completely eschew the state in any way and expose us to liability, but just to say, I think we're working on a similar path. That's a very solid path for our city. So
I think we're good on this one unless people have questions. It's just an issue we're tracking. All right, keep us going.
All right, economic development and land use section. Mixed use development downtown.
Well, I think this might also partially bleed over to the CETA discussion, so I think we should.
Well, do we need to talk about the North Gateway one here? Yeah. Because the downtown one, the Glenwood development one are going to be all CETA. Yeah. Let's skip down to the North Gateway one.
Okay.
North Gateway development.
Can we do a little just like clarifying of like, what does that mean today? Because I think that's meant different things over the years. So it would be interesting to know, like, if we keep it on here, what does it mean now?
I think also, Neil, if you could give kind of like a historical thumbnail of North Gateway and some of that affiliated planning commitments that we made that play into that and on the conference.
Sure. So I think, Councilor Riley, you hit it right on the head. Sometimes when we say gateway, we just mean the kind of gateway area. But this North Gateway is more of the land that's sometimes called puzzle parts to the north of that space, and that's within, I believe it's within the UGB, correct, Mary Bridget? And there is potential land for development, but there is so much work that needs to be done in the planning and the infrastructure. And to just get to that piece, it would take more than like a consultant. It would take a focused 3 to 5 year, I think, launch pad to get the work that's needed to be done. Because we're still now on the like traditional gateway, even that infrastructure is at its limit. And so to move further to the puzzle parts area, work needs to be done there, and then infrastructure needs to go to the north.
Neil, how much economic interest do we have from people that want to move their businesses to the North Gateway segment right now? They're just being said, hey, we can't do it because planning or zoning. Is there? I guess it's an alley question.
We hear from certain property owners that own more than one piece of property up there of interest.
Or they're saying, I want to build something now, but I can't because of planning. I just want to know, do we have much interest in doing that?
I would say there is interest from people who have current ownership up there.
But I haven't heard of a specific project. Is that your question? or-
No,
like, that's-
I'm just trying to,
right?
I'm just asking the question in terms of how much time should we be devoting to it? Because if there was a massive interest, like, hey, we got people that want to move in there, some different kind of manufacturing, maybe we want to look at different zoning, maybe we want to do some heavy industrial or whatever it is. That's kind of what I'm trying to gauge so that we know how much of a priority it should be for council. Just because obviously CETA or, downtown Glenwood is its own thing, and this is separate from that, so that's all.
I think they could maybe put it into the, Ally, just check me if I'm a little off.
Mhm.
It's basically a Glenwood sized bucket of work that will need to happen.
Okay.
And similar to Jasper Natron, it's the same area. And so we're looking at a similar type of focused work.
Go ahead, Cory.
Yeah, and you can correct me or talk, yeah, we might be saying similar things. I think that part of having like this group of priorities is that there are these buckets of areas that may not be at the very forefront, but could very quickly become at the forefront. And the reason I was asking, what I was asking about Gateway is that just the growth out there in terms of medical facilities is putting additional strain. And so well, I think it's morphed. I think it's no longer just this. Like, I think it is definitely like, we have this property and we need the infrastructure. But now it's like, it's this additional, like, we also need to pay attention to the infrastructure because of all the other growth that's happening out there. So if there's a way to keep this off to the side and continue to talk about it and advocate for it, because there could be a way to be like, okay, if we're gonna build your new 7 medical facilities, then we're gonna need additional funding that could help us move this whole thing along. So I think it's maybe it's not at the very top, but for me, these are still like, they're moving in the circle and ready to be brought in if we need to. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so as I'm out in other committee meetings, often I hear, people thinking big on their own side of the world, what they want to do, build, create the things. And that area always comes into the conversation. So I think at some point we're gonna be, we're gonna have to be prepared to at least navigate that conversation with people and tell them what that would mean and what their partnership would mean. And, I've heard from Congresswoman Hoyle that there could be federal support to help work through the ODOT issues and different things, depending on the use of that facility, right? There might be an ability to tie federal dollars to it. So I just think it feels like a pipe dream right now to get it done, but there are other conversations outside of here circling around that property.
Completely agree.
Go ahead, Victoria.
So this is just crazy, but I thought I would ask, is there any possibility of an urban renewal district for Gateway? Like, why wouldn't we, if the whole thing is that we need to raise dollars, that's what we're doing in Glenwood, why wouldn't we do that in Gateway?
I guess my
Because you go-
understanding is for urban renewal, doesn't have to be an area that's sort of blighted. And I don't think of Gateway as necessarily being blighted, but it is an area that has room for development, so.
I just, because you're also talking about some big tax revenue basis, like the hospital, like the different things like that, that could potentially bring a significant amount of money that could be focused towards infrastructure that we could, instead of putting it on the backs of, I mean, and then also include new developers, but just a thought.
Yeah, I think one of the things we should kind of break, that I always think about with Gateway is some of the ARPA dollars that we had identified early on, and this is kind of an important talking point for the rest of the council. Some of those planners were supposed to come on and start to work on Gateway, right? That work got replaced by CFAC,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
it's, I'd say that in a way to make sure that we have the historical background to share context, because people look at, opportunity for growth. It's a pretty pro-growth community. And if I'm like, why aren't you guys doing anything?
Yeah.
Well, we had a failure to launch there, right? What are you gonna do? The second thing I think that I have as far as a question is, I think you got two things going on. One of them is that 245 acres or whatever it is up there. And if it's 5 years of planning, right? So Alan, to your question about, do we have anybody really knocking on the door? Probably not really, right? Because, there's no infrastructure there. There's probably $100 million of investment to, open up these properties for development that we haven't even started the 5 years to figure out what to do. So I think the question from a staff perspective, and you guys can take it, and come back to this, it's like, if the first segment of it's 5 years, right? What does starting that clock look like? Right? And even if we can't come down and we're saying as a group, we are gonna deprioritize it because of staffing limitations right now. That would be important for us to know, because then we can kind of keep a look on for this question. It's like, well, what's the funding or advocacy from either the federal level or the state level that would actually help us to start that? But I think you also have a couple of layers to this. Like, one of them is that intersection on its own. Even if you don't talk about that plan to the north, that intersection needs a new plan.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right? So that's on the transportation list. And then more broadly, we've we're basically starting Gateway 2.0 here, right? And how do we get on the same page for what kind of growth that needs to happen there? So I think there's a couple levels here. And I think the question I would really, I don't think we're gonna find staff anytime soon to do it. But I think the question from an advocacy perspective is like, okay, what are those three components of, well, 2 or 3 components to actually start the clock? Because I think we got to do the intersection first.
Agreed.
And then how much money is the city really saying it's gonna need to at least start the clock on Gateway? Because that's a number we should be talking to people about, because then we can dump that back into the legislative committee and put it on one of our,
I mean, that would just be brilliant.
And I do think, to Victoria's point about the urban renewal, I think the thing that makes Gateway different is that it is developing. And if we were able to get to those infrastructure pieces, I think it would develop without.
Yep.
And tax paying, all of that. So I don't know that that's what, yeah.
On ramp further down Game Farm too. I mean, there's a lot of.
yeah, I mean, there's so much, there's so much noise about it where I don't think we need to do at least a little bit of the administrative work, if you will, to at least kind of go, okay, what's the plan? And knowing that we've got to go out and support as a group, the question that's saying they can't pull people off the state mandates to do this. But, we could go out there and ask for more money or pursue a grant at some point or something like that. Did you miss anything about this?
In other words, it stays on the list.
It stays on.
Anything else on this one?
Nope. Let's talk about Corey's favorite thing.
The mess at Mohawk is what I call AKA mess at Mohawk.
The intersection.
Mess at Mohawk. Which is also a long range plan, but.
Well, You want a quick update on
Yeah.
where we're at? So, we did the Band-Aid, which was, okay, now trucks and cars can make that right-hand turn. And then we have a group, an engineering tech and the engineering group working on a more substantial Band-Aid, which would be a long-term, like 5 to 8 year truck reinforced road. And then there would be the long-term intersection redesign. It includes this massive sewer line that's under the road. So people are starting to see like, the Band-Aid, which I don't know that everybody's happy with, they're gonna get a more substantial repair. And engineering's already working on kind of what that larger piece would look like and how we pay for it.
Does everybody understand the sewer problem at that intersection? Because this was why it didn't end up on the street bond. Can you tell?
Yeah, there's a sewer line, it's pretty deep. It goes from, I guess, where the Wendy's is, under the overpass. And that needs to be replaced.
Is it above the road, above 105 or
It's below.
below, oh, okay, below the highway?
Yeah, so it's a pretty massive
Oh, geez.
project.
Miss.
That means ODOT is,
Yeah, which is the reasoning behind doing a more substantial, intermediate fix while we work all that out. And then the intersection would be, redesigned because it's over capacity now. So that may mean some businesses lose a little bit of that frontage, and that's right of way work, and that takes some time as well.
So, do people have more questions about that Mohawk intersection? I know there's a lot of community interest in this, right? Because if the state asks for a capital project for the transportation bill, this is the one I would circle and put forward. Instead, but it's gonna take a long time.
Yeah.
And then this one for right now, or Main Street strategy?
Let's just skip right over that.
I don't like it.
That's my word.
Do we want to
Well, then Main
put
Street
that,
or-
Mess on Main Street.
Oh, that's not really, yes, it
want to put
is.
that to CETA as well? or-
Well,
or
I
is it-
think, is this the safety strategy or is this? or is
Oh,
this
this is
different?
the.
Isn't this more about like what was happening at roundabouts and all that?
Yeah.
That's why I said, could we just not talk?
Well, like that thing is right, like effectively sort of dead, right? Like it is not.
The 42nd.
No,
No, the Main Street
broader,
safety.
what you think is of like that 9 roundabouts or whatever it was.
Oh, right, that was
So
proposed.
now the
in-
question is, do we want to sort of take this whole thing off the list? Or do we want to try to work on it and pivot it to something else? Or do we want to just check, ask for some safety statistics about on Main Street in another year? Or do we want to come back to it?
I like that, but my other, of like just keeping up on the statistics. But my other question is, at some point, does this become, because this is one of the things we talked about when we were working through this. Does this become, if ever like ODOT was like swimming in money, they could come in and do what they wanted, right? Like if we take it off of our list, we sort of abdicated a say to a certain point about what happens. I'm saying this as a question, like, if someday they were like, we are now gonna come in and do this because you all didn't do it, could they do that?
I don't know.
that's almost like a city attorney question, because Main Street is an ODOT
Yeah.
road.
Mhm.
So the
But then they would
question,
be taking land that isn't within the
But they still
city.
get to do, I mean, they.
So the question
What's
is-
the question?
So-
The question is, if we were just to take this off the list and ignore it and be like, we're not paying attention to this. And eventually someday, ODOT could come in and do what they wanted with it,
Because it's an ODOT.
because it's an ODOT.
I think that's probably true, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some like outreach or rules what ODOT was gonna do had to have a local component about knowing its land use and transportation, about like reaching out to locals or coordinating with local jurisdiction.
That
That
helps,
makes sense.
because it makes sense then that we would want to at least keep a pulse on it, because, eventually.
Just, my Main Street is a bugaboo that we might want to sweep under the rug, but I think what we as a council have is the opportunity to say, what parts of Main Street do we want to go fast? And what parts of Main Street do we want to go slow? And if you ask one business owner, they'll say 25 miles an hour. Next one, they'll say 45 miles an hour. And these are the huge policy things that I think are really important. They're extremely important in terms of safety. They're extremely important in terms of bikes, because it's insane to think that I'm going to ride my bike next to 45-mile-an-hour traffic, regardless of what the street signs say. And the design of the road is completely backwards in terms of promoting what speed we actually want it to go. in part because of the bike lanes and other issues along with that, and the large buffers that we have that promote fast traffic as opposed to slow traffic. So the whole, as far as all of Main Street strategy goes, it is a very large conversation. I'm scared that we were not gonna be able to talk about it intelligently for a while. I mean, if we just abstract this from downtown and do this. So I would just say we have to keep this in the back of our minds as far as a conversation, especially with the business owners along that route.
Well, I think there's a big question for at least the three of you, well, and four of you, right? Because I think, Corey, you got part of Main Street too, which is, one way to think about this is the 7 Mile backbone, an industrial complex that, produces what we manufacture here. So that's a reasonable way to sort of think about it. The other one is, does walking away from the safety question prevent, it's really what we want to do, is think about it at a ward type level, because if I went around and asked each one of you along your part of Main Street, in your ward, right? Like, how do we drive economic development? You guys would have, there's stuff we probably want to do that would make, life better. Or like option C is essentially, do we just want to collectively sort of leave it alone for a couple of years and sort of see? Because I'm betting there's some needs out there, but I don't know how big they are, right? But also, right, it's back to that question of we don't have people to go out and just do a ton of visioning, if you will. Yeah.
Assuming some more fatalities out there might help push it. That's what it takes.
Well, we have the lights out there. We have it's well lit now.
There still will be fatalities out there.
When's the last time you heard of a fatality?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
When's the last time you heard of a fatality on Main Street?
I don't know, but I'm sure happened in Glenwood.
So
That's where having the data would be helpful.
So, yeah, I think on a safety question, right, and I'm looking at Neil to just jot a note that says at some point, right, like we just need to bring the last data set of, safety data back to us. But more broadly, I'm curious what the board of you think, which is, when you think about your business community and think about needs that are, out there, are you saying, hey, I'm fine just leaving it alone for right now? Or saying, hey, maybe we come back to this and give me a chance to really think about, like, hey, what is that, what is the, farm, food and farm store, the Cascade Farm, needing that old Safeway, old Safeway complex, right? Like, are there other economic development needs, community needs that are along the road, or are you essentially saying, hey, like, yeah, I want to check in about safety, but I kind of want to, just let this thing go?
Well, I can tell you where I stand on it. I think it's both and, I do want to keep up on the safety, because I do think that's where I think we lost control of the narrative before. It became all about the needs of businesses and we stopped talking about the safety, which had driven the conversation to begin with. And I think, I'm thinking just about the section that I have, and we have that land that we bought right there on 16th or wherever that is. And I think of some of the changes. So for me, I would want to keep it as part of the conversation. And maybe we do have a couple of work sessions where we map it out, look at what's happening in terms of growth and development, how things are changing. Because I think one of the longtime challenges, to Alan's point, is that, yes, to the industry, absolutely. But also we have a lot of increased homes out there and, little businesses that are getting tucked in and around. And so that's making the multi-use pressure on it. So I'm not ready. I don't want to put it aside.
That's good feedback.
Yeah.
What about the rest of you?
I think she said it well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to see the statistics too of the safety, because I haven't seen them prior, and it would be good to see what's happening now. And I haven't heard of it, like we brought up, I haven't heard anything for a while except for in Glenwood. So it'd be interesting to see that change, or if there has been, or what's happening. in the
A lot
safety.
of that too has to do with pedestrian and different things like that. But different sections of the road, like you say, have different needs. So we, up in our area, it's a truck route. Whereas in 16th Street, obviously, it's a lot more pedestrian and bike. So I think that's fair.
Anything else? Are we good on that?
Yeah, I think we're good on this one.
All right, let's keep it rolling. Development code update.
Anybody want to have anything to talk about the development code? Like, it's still on there.
It's in the process as we speak. Mandates.
All right, let's keep going to the,
All right, infrastructure, road projects. We have bond measure and construction backlog.
Which we now have a very accurate reporting. of.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah, we just did the
Love
pavement
that.
condition index,
Mm.
so,
Yeah.
That was super useful.
It's super.
Cool.
yeah.
and right, like, and we'll start to see those road bonds in 26 and 27. So that will be, and then in your head, I think we've got to, like, we're gonna end up having to do a road, like another road bond for this. So I don't know, the only question I had on road projects was, I think I heard this just desire the last time to look for an opportunity to talk about residential streets. And whatever that might, whatever that might, look like people,
100%.
yeah.
Because that really is gonna make a difference in people's perception of what we're doing. They see, and Eugene did that. They spent several 4-year bond periods doing the main roads, and then they started doing these local roads and getting some of them that were easier to do. People started saying, oh, okay, now they care about us and they care about our neighborhood
I
too.
completely agree.
Yeah, so I think that that's definitely something we need to at least keep on the forefront of future bond measures. People get weary, but if they hear, oh, we're gonna use some neighborhood collectors, not just, yeah.
It's what people see every day. They walk out their front door. Yeah, it's important. Walk their dog, I mean, yeah, I completely.
And
agree.
hopefully there'll be some connection with federal when it comes to like sidewalks and, getting that safety factor in of being able to, promote more walking and biking. Like, we don't have any sidewalks. These kids are walking in the street, right? So,
And it relates to housing too.
yeah,
Is that really-
exactly.
On the MPO, last, I don't know, Thursday, I've lost track of the days. We do have more money in some walking paths and sidewalks that has come in because we're like probably, if you remember 2 years ago, we
Mhm.
allocated money towards it.
Yes.
So we've got more transportation money that's, in the queue and gonna start getting built out here shortly.
The ones that we had picked chosen a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was like one of them was
That
over by
school, it's in
Amway.
your ward.
Yeah,
It's
what,
off 32nd,
yes,
Jasper, it's like, yeah,
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 by
that
the
school
school,
there.
the sidewalk. Yeah.
And Centennial's in there, that by Centennial's.
That's gonna be awesome.
So any other questions about roads in general? Yes, we want to still maintain roads.
So gonna do a shout out for 35th and commercial. 28.
I know, like,
Or does
but I think that's actually a really helpful point, right? Because we're gonna, like, we've worked this problem up to this point, and each of your wards has got one of those roads that's the 35th, the 28th of the world, and starting to understand how to, articulate them to everybody else would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think those two wards are really what you're talking about, that commercial, that whole area back there,
That's that
is-
42nd
oh my
Olympic,
gosh,
it's
yeah.
used by, it's
Yep.
continuously busy
100%,
and
yeah.
there's people, walking their dogs and pushing their children in strollers and there's no sidewalk and bicycles and
Yeah.
it's very fast,
The
35 or whatever, yeah.
the one place I would
Falling
like us
apart.
to go out and get more information is on Bob Schraub. What is it, Bob Schraub and Daisy? It's a county road, like it's a county intersection, right? But like when I see, like, so many people out of Victoria's area access Bob Schraub that way. There's a lot of accidents
There are a lot
there.
of accidents out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not our jurisdiction, it's a county road, but it would be helpful for the staff just to ask the question like, hey, are you guys, like, what's going on with this intersection? Right, because we're gonna get a lot of information about it.
Yeah.
Anything else on that topic?
No, I think and we talked about
We
42nd
talked about
Street.
42nd.
What about the state transportation bond? Or, sorry, it's probably not a bond, it's probably a bill. Like, it's something we're tracking. We spent a lot of time in legislative committee about it, right? Like, does anybody have? things about it?
Beth is the expert.
Beth
Yeah,
is
we
the
have
expert.
learned, Beth is the
I
expert.
don't have any questions, We'll try
We're
to.
trying to get anything that's not in Portland in that bill.
Yeah,
Just something.
Is that all on you, Beth? Get
Pretty much everything they're looking at are projects from 2017 that aren't completed and mostly out of the Portland metro area, but they're prioritizing. So it's leaving the regional projects kind of. So we're trying to have that conversation about, you guys heard it up there about, 42nd Street being a $10 million project in 2017, and now it's projected to 17 to 20 million. So there's a big discrepancy there.
Yeah, I think the other thing we should watch there, right, because I've heard some of our delegation understand that if Portland's getting more money to close the gap for their roads, we're gonna need more money.
Yeah.
And this is where we're gonna have to be really nimble and flexible because we're not ready to make a big 42nd Street ask because 42nd Street's gonna take like $150 million and it will be fantastic by the time we do levying the roads and everything. But we may have to be ready to sort of, if this is our one ask, we may just have to ask for the money up front, and then wait, 5 or 6 years and go, oh, by the way, remember 10 years ago, we said we were gonna need,
Well, the other little piece of this that I think we should be paying attention to, and maybe it's through the legislative committee, is, there's gonna be conversations about how to fund this. And do we change, they're already talking about, the gas tax doesn't go far enough, what's gonna be net. So I think it'll be important for us to know where we stand and whether we advocate for whatever comes up in terms of funding changes. So maybe that's another piece to
I have a
say.
question, actually. Are we at risk of losing that 10 million that we got by putting it off for what, for
The
later?
42nd Street?
Yeah,
Yeah, the 12, I think it's 12. No, we're not.
okay.
We're not. We have it.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a time.
There's not a time limit.
Okay.
It's worth less every year. That's the
Right.
challenge.
inflation's giving us a penalty. Yeah, so we're ready to go to public safety.
Okay, public safety, cahoots in Lane County.
So I can talk about this. Lane County is over the past year has been standing up a crisis response model. I feel like they're getting better. We meet every other week to talk about what has been their calls for service. But I need to make some decisions as I put together the budget. Last year, we did allocate some funding for cahoots because Lane County hadn't yet stood up their program. I don't think they are yet at 24-hour service. So that's kind of like, cahoots is not able, they haven't structured themselves in a way where they would be eligible for federal funding. And that's kind of the sticking point there, whereas Lane County is. In my mind, it makes sense to do a full pivot to Lane County because then they will be able to get that reimbursement. I need to talk to the police chief and figure out what does that mean for our police officers out there. I don't know how often they are even using cahoots versus the Lane County model. So that's, one thing I need to talk about with Chief Shear and Chief Caven as I put together the budget. But my sort of in the back of my mind, I was thinking I'm gonna at least reduce it, if not eliminate it because Lane County has taken that over. They receive funding for that, that makes sense. But I want to make sure that I don't leave our officers in the lurch in the process.
Any questions for Nancy on that?
I don't have any questions, but can I have a few things to say? I think.
The floor is yours. You need a soapbox?
I think it's good that we're looking at this because I know this is a service area that's in transformation. And I think that there's still a lot of bugs that are trying to be worked out and like tensions between the two organizations. And I think originally the idea was that there would be sort of one central dispatch so that it would be a both and, right? That depending on what people needed. So I think I'm really interested, it's not my decision to make, I don't think, but I think it's gonna be interesting to see if those end up being two completely separate service delivery things, how that works out, or if they somehow tried to bring them together and share dispatch or whatever, how that works out. Because I think that's one of the challenges is like, who's gonna contract with them in terms of municipalities and how that's gonna work. So all those pieces are still being worked out and there's a lot of hard, heavy feelings about it. And just knowing that it's,
I think there's some cultural issues as well, right? Because Cahoots being a nonprofit, long history in the community, but, you know, in order to be eligible for federal funding, you have to collect
Yep.
certain amount of data and there's a greater level of accountability that Cahoots was not willing to do. So that's kind of been the stalemate. And in my mind, you don't get to have it both ways, right? And so I'm hopeful that Lane County will get more capacity there, and that would be my preferred way of doing that would be to, you know, because then I know it will be done the right way and be met to the standards that for the funding.
and the county is, like, you were absolutely right, that they are still trying to build that program out in terms of like staffing and be around the clock. And the other piece that I'm not sure of is just what the balance is gonna be between rural and city, because that was one of the big pushes for the county to do it, is they would be able to get out to the rural communities. And so what that's gonna look like, but I'm glad you're on it.
So if we change substantially what we're doing in next year's budget, it would be nice to really think through that messaging.
Yeah.
Because I think if people feel like it's just, we're, you know, Cahoots is losing money opposed to understanding everything, right? It's gonna be a conversation at the budget committee.
It's a very sticky community
Yeah.
conversation right now.
It is,
Yeah.
and it's gotten a little bit ugly out in the community, and I don't want to engage in that, and I haven't made a determination, hear me on this, I really do want to have an in-depth conversation with Chief Shear and to a lesser degree, Chief Caven. I don't know how much Cahoots enters their world, but my primary concern is the safety of our community and our officers. And how that plays out, I'll let you know as we get closer to budget.
Could we do a 5-minute recess for a bathroom break? Victoria, excuse yourself. All right, I'm ready with that.
5 minutes?
Right. I think you read more than I would sneeze the other day.
We wrapped up on Cahoots. Any other comments or questions or clarification on the Cahoots topic? I think we're good there. All right, let's dive into emergency response and preparedness.
So I think that we had our last Team Springfield joint elected officials meeting, and that was our primary topic of conversation, as well as how can we expand training on emergency preparedness, doing more joint things together, so we've been communicating on the Team Springfield level. We're going, I believe we need to set a meeting for our next Team Springfield joint elected officials, but I think this topic will continue as a primary focus as we work. We have the Alice app that is it Alice? Sarah. Why do I even call it Alice? I'm confusing it with Alice training. It's Sarah. I was like, that's wrong. Yeah, so as we build that out, and I think this is an ongoing effort. I don't want to see this necessarily drop off because this is again a staff capacity issue.
If it's not stimulated, it's put off, then we have an ice storm. Where were we?
Well, and Springfield Utility Board also, I was at their meeting last month and they spent the entire work session showing the programs that they're doing both with water and electric to be able to track, maintain, help get things on quicker, how to work with the city. So I think we're looking at a more positive relationship that we saw that was somewhat lacking in the last one. So I think I agree with you.
I'm glad you went to that to see, obviously, liaison, but that we're getting that kind of feedback back. I think from a Team Springfield perspective, we want to talk about this again with the elected officials.
Yeah.
Because it's just something that we want to keep front of mind, and that is a good, community-wide conversation that we need. The Dave Willis is a really big champion of emergency response, right? Like, so he said something so funny to me that it's like, you can't prepare for everything, but it's sort of like an attitude. that you have to be like, okay, you know, we live in a world where there's more chaos coming our way.
Coming from an insurance agent, that's probably.
I know,
So,
yeah, it doesn't surprise you, right?
Yeah.
He is, you know, he is bringing by, the former school board member, Naomi Raven, apparently chairs like a local community, group of churches that has this as a topic. They're bringing somebody by, to meet with Michelle and I, just to be like, hey, this is the contact in the community, here's kind of what we do. So I think that's a good conversation too, right? Because if we have more contacts in the community, it will be easier for things like Sarah to work. I'm not doing it now.
Anything else on that or any clarification? We're good?
We did the governance. We did ESF governance as well.
About Springfield Police Department?
Any questions about PD? We're doing a fantastic job lately.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't know to what level we need to make this as a priority that we're tracking. They've achieved accreditation now. We have the structures in place where they do the annual use of force report. So, I don't, and also the deductible that used to be quite high is now back to the lowest level. It's now $100,000 per incident, on track with the other departments. So I think that this has been a success.
They have taken serious what happened to us 3 years ago. The chief has. Now we have. I went to the awards thing the other night. God, they're beautiful, those guys, really earned it. And then the other thing was, they're still recruiting.
Mhm.
And we're gonna be taken care of.
Yep.
I have a question about this. And maybe it's something that is no longer something, it's fallen off. But if I'm remembering correctly from the Kinney settlement, there was supposed to be like some annual meetings and reports that were supposed to happen. And I thought they were coming to us, but maybe, so I'm curious as to where that's at and we can keep that on the.
So the reports that are supposed to come to you annually out of the Kenny settlement is the use of force report. So that's that work session that you have generally in the spring. And then that gets posted. Then there were some internal or not internal, there are assessments done by CIS that are posted on the website. I think sometimes those get sent to council, but it's not necessarily a separate work session item. So those are the main interface with the council is the use of force report, which is an annual look at their uses of force.
And that's, yeah, I think that we've seen it in April or early May by the time it sort of migrated its way through the channels. I think it is helpful for this conversation if we just, like, it's not on the agenda right now. If we just find a spot and put it out there so people are working towards it. The one thing that, that I remember last year, it came up a couple of times was, hey, we didn't get it agenda'd fast enough, right? So as people track what we have going on, people will go, okay, this thing's not forgotten to go.
If we generally try to do this in April, so we can.
Yep.
Anything else on that topic? Good, okay. Environmental sustainability and compliance. Environmental regulation.
We're on page 2, people.
Yeah. Bridget.
I don't. We haven't talked about a lot of it. What's that?
I think we've kind of already talked about a lot of this stuff.
I just, as the MWMC liaison, I'm curious, I mean, they're proposing probably a consistent, I mean, it's right, 3 to 3.5, 3 to 3.3% increase in rates. I mean, is there any other feedback that I should be asking them? Or like feedback from council to say like, hey, it's a relatively standard increase in terms of their wastewater usage or wastewater usage fees.
I don't know that I have feedback about it. I will tell you the one thing I look at when I see them is they project them out 5 years. And usually the thing I'm looking for is the fee that we're selecting now kind of relatively level those 5 years, right? Because sometimes what happens is we pick a lower number early on, and then 2 years from now, it's like 9%, and then it comes back down, right? So if it's relatively flat and you've done your due diligence to sort of make it be as good of a fiscal steward as we all try to be. Well, but would have any more feedback than that. Can we just chat about Jasper Natron for a while? I don't know how this one ended up under the environmental compliance.
ChatGPT.
Did it hallucinate?
It did.
I also was like, what am I missing on this one? I'm so eager to hear what they're doing.
Background, I don't know.
I think this was the development, there's a development area out in Jasper Natron that has sewer in there that doesn't not necessarily have.
Oh,
water.
that's it, yeah.
And so I'm guessing that's why. I know we're just tracking this, but maybe we can just leave this one on and just come back to it. Because really, it's like, it's in subs wheelhouse, if you will, right? Because they have to figure out what they want to do from a water infrastructure perspective.
I could give you a little
Yeah, go ahead.
update. And Nancy and I got the same email, but it was, early this morning when we were setting up. But Sub has done the report that we, as a group, requested to see how much it would cost to extend water. And they're gonna provide that report at the next sub board meeting. So they are moving forward with getting the information that is needed.
So, well, I guess we haven't read nobody's read the report yet. So I think it's a question about whether or not we need to wait, and just let them do their work. Or, option two is to sort of be, whether or not we're going to have to sort of sign, if they're going to go out for state or federal infrastructure money, if we're just going to have to be there to lobby and be supportive for it.
Any other discussion on that? Is there anything else in that topic that we need to go over? Did it already get covered?
So I want to give a little bit of context. So this is the Nancy cheat code. I use ChatGPT a lot, you all know that. So I took your priorities from last year, which was just a big laundry list. And my prompt on ChatGPT was, from the perspective of a strategic planning, consultant, put these into categories that could then morph into a strategic plan. So I was kind of reverse engineering the work you already did into something that we could categorize and look at. So it's not exactly 100% perfect, and there's a little bit of redundancy, but it was our first crack at sorting these into categories that we could then message.
Which category does this need to move to?
By economic development.
Development?
Yeah.
But like the next one is, community engagement and quality of life, those, close, but maybe, I don't know. if
I
that
think we can,
necessarily-
I think you're gonna ask us if we have anything else to put on the board here in a second.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need to talk about any of those. We talked about our option levy,
Yeah.
urban renewal and.
The last bucket are these time-bound projects that have deadlines, which I know some of them have been discussed. But just understanding that these projects require special focus due to their time sensitivity. We discussed road projects, State Transportation Board environmental regulations. Is there anything else on this list? I know we have CETA and that's a separate conversation. Is there anything else on here that we need discussion around?
Suggest that we change the general fund imbalance to the fiscal sustainability task
I like
force. So we all know what we're talking on the same.
And we're gonna talk in detail about this here in a little bit.
So do you want to pivot to the mayor's task force update?
Well, I think you're looking, do we have a place in the agenda that we could just talk about other things people want to add to the list? This is our list from last year. We went through this list. We sort of said what we're working, what we're not. I am not gonna guarantee it's gonna get worked because there's probably no staff to doing it, but the first step to really getting, your issues on the table is just to ask the question about like, what other issues should we be tracking? Is there some sort of interest in it? And then, Nancy's gonna keep them in kind of a staging area, because the rule that we agreed upon last year was we can't identify staffing, we gotta take something off the list and put something on the list, but it can exist in this sort of, hey, we're generally interested in it, we would love to come back to it.
And we do have time on the agenda for that. We were going to start with the task force first, but let's flip them if you want. I'll wait.
If you, we can.
We can flip them. Let's get into anything we want to have. Any kind of new projects?
So this isn't a new project, but one thing that's not on here, and which is, as we know, near and dear to everything I do at council, is around housing. And we do already have a team And so it would be great to just keep tracking, how much housing has come online with the affordable housing projects. Are we still working on our land banking? Just to still make that a priority, because I think it's off and going and I want to not be telling people lies when I'm talking about what's happened. So is there?
It's
room for housing?
it's too early in the year to start telling.
To start telling lies, yeah. But I was like,
to start telling
housing isn't even on here when we spend so much time trying to like get money to housing here.
That's a great, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think we all. need
I would,
be that.
I would love to have some of that information as well. Yeah.
And some of the reporting the housing group's been doing has been really good.
Yeah.
Um,
Their flyers and their stuff that they put together, it's been great.
So I think before we get in trouble with the city manager, I think housing's actually being worked. We just want some more information about it.
Yeah, we just want to work it into the priority area or whatever.
I think it's topic conversation in so many rooms that it would be good to have. Any information, updated information on that as well.
What else do you guys have?
You're saying in addition to something, we already, it's already on the list. then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's not on the list, if it's something that you wanna, that you wanna work towards, or it's something you wanna talk about from a priority perspective, this is now the time since I broke the agenda within the first hour and a half. I will put something on the treatment court.
Treatment court.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's 2 points to it when we talk about next year, right? Like one of them is always good to have us get more information because as a body, we basically committed to the community. We work on treatment, which we're doing. The second piece is I've heard rumblings around a desire to talk about a treatment court expansion. And I just want to put a flag in the ground and go, okay, let's come back to this after it's been going for 2 years to say, hey, do we need more capacity? What does that look like? Et cetera, et cetera.
Talk to some people that's gone to that court, they've cried. Accused, the way he treats people. Wonderful man, the judge.
I was gonna say, is he coming in and giving us an update annually?
I think
We
so.
still have to do their reviews, remember?
Yeah.
The day they forgot to come? Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, we had an update in the fall, but
I just was wondering if it's gonna be an
Put
answer.
yeah, we should make that an annual update and put that somewhere in the calendar. Maybe the fall, we have so much going on.
Because it was a grant.
Yeah, it is.
Eventually.
It's a federal, it's
like a
through the
3-year
Department of Justice.
Right, so that just means that there's an end point that we have to determine is something we want to continue, so.
what else do you want added to the list? And we've talked about constrained things already, so we don't have to, the thing you have to remember is what's going on with Gateway.
I don't know. Okay, I have a dozen things that occur to me, but I have to
Start with the top one.
Start with the top one, which is simply walkability. And I know that touches in so many different areas. And I know we have the citizen bike and pedestrian committee, right? And I think that when we're doing a project of any sort, especially within Public Works, getting that conversation more involved with pedestrians, making Springfield just slightly incrementally more walkable, or, it's places where, for example, you have a sidewalk, but then you immediately have a driveway. And so now all of a sudden you're going down like this, and then you're back up like this. It makes it very difficult for not only ADA compliance, I don't even know if it's compliance, but it's just uncomfortable. And just overall, the level of safety we have in terms of walkability, identifying a few small areas, I think I don't quite know how to do it since I'm only relatively recently sworn in, but I want to make sure that that's something we really are talking about regularly.
Well, you need to understand too, that the sidewalk becomes the responsibility of the property owner, not the city, after it's put in. So that's important to note that if there's a crack, if there's anything that needs to be done, it falls on the property owner to do that, not the city.
And is that by state or is that by federal or is that by?
That's in our code. That's the way it is.
That is a city policy that
Yeah,
we've
it's the way
chosen
all
way
cities are.
before all of our time.
Yeah.
Is that if your responsibility is to repair the sidewalk, and frankly, if we ask the whole community, I bet you 97% of people do not realize that.
No.
Even the businesses where the trees, because we mandate that they put in street trees and then the street trees trash the sidewalks. And then we say, well, it sure was there.
Well, okay, let's, this is a but I think the street tree conversation, I walked in thinking about, we want to make sure we're all saying the same thing out to people. There are street trees where that's happened, and our street tree list is, did include things that don't fit in sidewalks and created that damage. And I'm looking at Neil here. That is not that, I don't think that's the case anymore for new development. So yeah, people go through that, right? But we want to sort of help people realize that, yes, that was a 20-year ago problem. New development or new trees that are going in are going off of a smaller list that care for the utilities and care for the appropriate size of the space that we have.
Michelle has something, and then I had something to add to
Yeah.
that.
So the BPAC actually just had a 4-hour strategic planning meeting.
Beautiful.
And that very topic was brought up. We do at least 2, try to do 4 walking, biking, assessments. And the question was brought up, where would council like us to prioritize from the committee's perspective? So it would be, you can give that, like, if you have specific areas, I'm happy to share that with the committee.
And later on, the 3 of us are going to talk about swapping you on a BPAC and her on something else. I just have not.
For you.
I just have not had
Yeah.
the time to set that conversation up.
Definitely.
After your video, it was very clear that.
Yes. Well, yeah.
That you didn't belong on that committee.
I have like 5
And then it went to her, and now it's you.
Yeah, saying, I'm not gonna tell you what to do, but after that,
So the piece I wanted to add to that is, I think that this also ties into, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but we're identifying the areas for CFAC, right?
Climate friendly.
Yeah, the climate friendly areas that we've got all this. And so when we talk about those things, I think those are good places to start with that work, because that's a big piece of it, is that we're supposed to be identifying these areas that we're gonna increase the walkability and so I think it fits into a few places.
What else do we have?
Can I have one more thing?
Sure.
I'll cut myself off.
This is really your chance to start to get to introduce the topics so that we can make sure we're tracking them and we're talking about them. Go ahead.
So related to, so there's no 24-hour pharmacy within Eugene or Springfield, correct me if I'm wrong, except for a hospital. Is there a 24-hour pharmacy in this region?
No. Well, that is, we all think we're on the same page. That's the universal ECDEV look of, that sounds right.
I believe that's the case. And in speaking with the fire department, the fire chief, one of the comments he had said to me was, yeah, a lot of folks think that they can take their kids or themselves into urgent care. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that urgent care is referring a lot of these people to the emergency room.
Yep, that is true.
And so, I'm not against urgent care, it's fine. But I think there's this major gap that we're having, and whether it's a matter of, unhoused persons or just simply people that are having a medical crisis. I'll share, I had to actually call the fire department to come help me when my 4-month-old kid was having a major croup attack and his pulse ox was low. And they were amazing, and God bless them for that. But there's we had to wait so long for that. And again, fire department, amazing, bless them, all good. But I'm really concerned about this missing middle, if you will, not of housing, but a missing middle of medical care in our community. And obviously I can't control that, but if we can have that conversation and find out some way to incentivize, hey, what is that middle ground? Because the report is sadly that a lot of the urgent cares aren't capable of delivering what is necessary for a lot of these incidents. And frankly, a lot of times they happen late on a Friday night. And that's
conveniently happen.
I don't know how to have that conversation.
Yeah, so I think if you want to note this one and have the legislative committee look at this one, and my initial gut take would be to simply send it back over to the county commissioners as a health authority, saying, hey, in our community, we see this is a potential issue, from your friends over at the mayor's office in the city of Springfield. And then, as you're doing your work around, healthcare gaps, 24-hour pharmacies, are an issue for us.
Are you, Alan, are you speaking more of the time it took, or are you talking about, I was a little lost there, or are you talking about the ambulance response time?
Ambulance
or-
response time was great. I'm talking about, so there's late at night, let's say, there's very little option for treatment except for in the emergency room. And the emergency room is dealing with a whole host of issues, which could easily be rebalanced to, hey, if your arm is off, you come to the emergency room versus honestly, you just need a direct medicine administered. It doesn't take, it's not rocket science, like, it's a good intelligent healthcare provider can actually do that. Oh yeah, they need some prednisone, they need some of this and that, and they're good. And it'll last 3 days and come back and check in with your PCP tomorrow. Like that, like there's this gap of deliverability. And the difficulty that I'm bringing up is really that while we see a lot of billboards for urgent care, the urgent care isn't doing enough to really solve some of these bigger issues. So.
Yep, that's all.
So also, I think that it's important of two things. One is that the other thing is the time that it takes to get into urgent care. A lot of times you go there and they say, we'll put you on a list and come back in 3 hours. But irregardless, part of the stabilization program that Lane County came and talked to us about did have to do with the ability to dispense medications on an immediate basis. But that's more for people in crisis. So people that are having like a mental health issue. But it was a topic of conversation is that, somebody doesn't necessarily need to go to the emergency room, but they are out of their medication that helps keep them stable from having an incident, or they're having an incident and they can go in and get that immediate care. So that is something that was being discussed with the county's stabilization center that we're looking at getting in a couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years is a couple of years.
I know.
That was a short time in building,
Yeah.
Okay. I have one for the CETA list, but I'm gonna hold on and talk about it with, when we get to the Economic Development Agency.
Are there any others?
So we're saying we've kind of encompassed it. We understand kind of our priorities, what's being worked, what's being not. Nancy, or Neil, or Mary Bridget, is there something that we haven't, like a topic that we haven't particularly talked about? I mean, we could rattle off probably 40 different other topics here that will continue to come up.
No, I think if there's other issues that we come up with, that would be part of our agenda setting process where we can dedicate time to that.
All right. So do you want to do the task force update?
Yeah, we can do that. Next. So there's the mayor's task force. Let's start with, really, in Allison, can you grab the agenda schedule? Really what I wanted to start talking about now is two portions of it. And, Allison's gonna look for the other sheet because I didn't tell her I needed it ahead of time because it's Saturday, which is like the framing of what this report's gonna look like. So when we start, if we back all the way up about our general fund balance, is that this started with to address it, started with the PSU report probably 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I've lost. 2 years ago. And then we moved into this phase of having a task force that is just finished its 4th meeting. We're gonna get out of that a report of options that people are comfortable with, or we have feedback about, and we'll show the list of the report right now. But when we talked about this, we were going to take that report and turn it into some sort of adopted strategy that we pass, that we tell the city manager that here's the strategic framework to work this in a long-term fashion and go forth and do, right? Us putting in the recommendations into a strategy and voting on it is going to give Nancy a framework where she can kind of paint between the lines, right? The question I wanted to start talking about today was when and how we want to approach that going into the fall. I don't know how big, or I'm sorry, going into the spring. I don't know how big the physical report's going to be. But we've got, some of this may have to go out to the voters. Some of this may have to go, we may be doing town halls about it, right? There's going to be a lot of potential work in this. So I'm going to kind of break this up into questions. Question 1 is, how many times do you guys want to see it and go through the material to be comfortable? Michelle and I talked about, you know, at least trying to do it at least 2 times before we go on spring break to have a good 60 minutes to probably an hour and a half work session about the material and get your get your feedback on it before you're really even asked the question, like, what's your opinion about it? So that's sort of question 1. Question 2 is, and I'm gonna, you know, just solicit our city manager's opinion here, is our goal, if you think about this in blocks, to have kind of at least some agreement about what the strategy is going into the summer, right, and finalize it in the fall? Or do you want to start shaping up the strategy in the fall? Do you just want the information first, think about it all summer, and kind of go and kind of go at it, you know, finalize something in the fall? And then we'll get into the kind of report contact. And I think the other kind of note is, I actually think there's going to be there's probably going to be at least 3 work sessions. One of them is going to be, they're going to bring a specific presentation about our budget back to us, right? So it's going to be the material the task force saw, but not specific to the report. That material I thought was interesting because I felt like it explained our budget, structural budget deficit at a different level. And then at least 2 meetings to go through all the material and let you ask questions and not really have a place where you're having to pick anything off the list, but more like learn what's in the report, get comfortable on the results. And then in the summer, right, there's the question about how fast do we want to build the strategy? I know I threw a lot there. You have anything to add? Fearless city manager.
I would just say we're gonna need some feedback from you. I haven't looked at the filing dates for the fire levy, but that's like a definite point in time where we have to hit that mark. So I would say I would want some sort of a discussion and decision by council prior to summer recess in order to be able to do the communication and outreach and all the filing, all of that.
Specifically on the fire levy.
Yeah.
So, okay, so put that on the list is things we have to decide before summertime. One is we have to make a decision about the fire levy. So April, May, June is gonna get really packed here, right? When they fill it out.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I said a lot and it's really hard when there's no report to talk about, right? So I want to acknowledge that. I want to talk about like kind of what pacing you guys want to work here. Go ahead.
So as part of the conversation on scheduling, how much conversation we want to have, it was my thought that it would be helpful to have at least one conversation following the presentation, give us time to digest the information that was provided during that presentation, and then come back maybe a week or 2 later while it's still kind of fresh, but we've had time to think about it. So that was just kind of at least one conversation in my mind while it's still kind of not stale.
Let me make sure I'm hearing you right. So we have a date on the calendar currently for April 21st to do a 60-minute update to council. And that is what the mayor just described as that contextual information that came to the committee. I'm assuming that we will not have a report done by that time because the committee will just have convened in March, right?
Yeah, that's the context.
Right.
The first one, April 21st, is the context conversation so we will not have a report at that point, but we're gonna see this presentation that helps with like, how much money do we spend versus Eugene and Corvallis and a bunch of other indexing cities.
And then I think we need to schedule another session. Is that where we get the report presented to you and you just essentially hear it and receive it, but not necessarily make a decision about yes, no, what, and then give yourself some time to marinate on it and then come back in a couple weeks and say, now we want some decision points around
Yeah,
that?
because it's just been my experience that when we get these big, huge reports full of information, by about the time we start really kind of conjuring up the questions, it's time to move on to another topic or meeting or, so I think it's important that we just dedicate time to it.
Okay. Does that sound good? Okay.
So we need at least 2 more meetings to schedule about it.
Okay, we can work that through. Do you want to do that right now or do you want to?
No.
We do that
I want to give
agenda
people a kind
Okay.
of sense. We don't have to, we're not
Just
gonna.
kind of a consensus on.
Okay, perfect.
I'm looking kind of for head nods to make sure that, you know, we're working this at the right place. Okay, now the other question is, I know this could change when we read the report, but going into the summertime, do you want to have a kind of, I don't know, a draft strategy, for lack of a better word, right? Have some conversations about what do we want to do? Because we're gonna change, we're gonna finalize it in the fall, right? But like, if we have, in my mind, we're working kind of towards the police levy, because if we're gonna change, you know, any sort of revenue options, like the police levy is the drop deadline that we've got to be able to do it in. So I think my recommendation would be to try to get to some initial consensus about what our strategy would be in the, you know, before we go on break.
Like that last work session.
Come back to
Yeah,
it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Clarity is kind. All I can say is clarity is kind, and even if we're dead wrong, the best reports I've ever written are the ones where I was dead wrong to start with, and then I ended up with a different conclusion. So
Okay, so everybody is saying yes, that we want to get to some sort of, you know, this is kind of where we're,
Steps.
yeah, this is kind of where we're at. Fine. Okay. Last question that I have, and then I'll see if Neil or Nancy have more questions. There is a community, there's gonna have to be a community conversation piece to this, right? And I don't know what that looks like yet. I think we're all still trying to figure that out, where we have to, you know, it may be, we do, you know, a mini town hall in your ward, for example. I don't know what the time frame about that's gonna be, but that's gonna be the opportunity to go answer questions for constituents, talk to people about what the report is and what changes we're making and why, right? And I'm just wanna get, again, start to frame this up in your mind that says, okay, at a point, we're all gonna be asked to go explain this to the public. And that's the conversation we have to have with folks about, this is kind of the way forward, this is kind of what we're thinking, and this is the why. Does anybody have concerns about that or questions about that? I think the timing is gonna be important here. Yeah.
So I think that's one component. Town halls, generally speaking, require people to come to us. So it's dependent on the people that are paying attention to the announcements and that want to actually physically get up and go and do the, you know, come to the town hall. I mean, Senator Merkley's was jam-packed last weekend, but
Nobody wants to
But
get
that's
up on a
not
Saturday to
always,
come. to
but that's
talk to
just
us.
not always the case, right? So I think outreach beyond a town hall is,
Yeah.
we're gonna need to think about that too.
We're gonna have to look for where people are gathering and go to them.
Yep.
And see if we can do some partnering, maybe with our Team Springfield partners, see what type of events we can have, if we can get a little bit of time. Maybe even like and I think some of the committee members would be willing to do that with you.
And it's challenging, but I've done HOAs. I mean, I had to deal with people up on Linda Lane and it was tough. They asked a lot of really tough questions, but it gave them the opportunity. I think they felt better knowing that they were able to like do that. So I don't know.
And I need to go to them.
Is there gonna be
Yeah.
like
Somewhat, yeah. for sure.
social media, community outreach, questionnaires, that type of, like there has been on other projects and other things, or?
Well, I think there could be, right, but I think it's gonna be for us with some, you know, recommendations from staff about how we want to do the, you know, reach out to folks, right? So it could be a social media conversation if we wanted. Go ahead.
And that, not to create more work for anybody, but could that be part of, if we're having that conversation going into the summer, maybe just a brief communications plan? Could be part of that, because I could see if we, you know, we are at the block party in September and we do these
Right.
things over the summer. But if we had a communication plan, then we can all be like, how we could plug in to do that. So when we come back in the fall, we've got as much info as possible.
So Elise has been our public information officer has been attending the meetings. And I wanted her to do that so she could hear the discussion and understand the context in which that discussion was happening. And you know, she is ready to pivot to help do that communication plan. I haven't given her the assignment because I wanted her to be able to like take a breath after State of the City.
Perfect.
She's had to talk to me every day for like 3 months.
She did a good job.
Okay. Other questions about, I know we're kind of waiting for the work to get on our desk and right, everybody's can reserve their opinion until they see it, but are there other questions about the task force, right? So that the goal is we agree upon what we're doing, but we've done a lot of work to kind of get there so that, you know, we can show our work to the public. All right. I think we're good on that one. So the next time we will really see it, material is in April.
There.
Yep. I think we're good.
Okay. So quick check-in with the group on the agenda. We were going to, the next topic, we have city attorney updates. We have budgeted around half hour for that at most. Do we need a break right now before we dive into that? Are we good for another 30 minutes and then we'll take a quick break again?
I'm good. We're good
To
to
proceed? Okay, well, I will turn it over to the city attorney.
I was gonna ask if you would come up, because I.
Yeah,
I'm
gonna join you.
My hearing aids turned up like 3 and I still couldn't hardly hear back there.
All right, hi, everybody. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today about a couple things about your operating policies and then have a discussion about council reimbursements. So I brought hard copies of your rules, just in case people like to take notes or like to look at these. So what we're passing around here are your operating policies. That's basically how you guys do your work procedurally, mainly focuses on the meeting. But just by way of kind of background, Counselor Stout, these rules are actually rooted in the charter. The charter says the council will have rules and that they'll annually review them. Generally annually, and you do that by a vote. If you're gonna make any changes. Generally, the council reviews these sometime in the spring. Over the past few years, you've been making changes to incrementally to these rules, like how meetings work in terms of having a hybrid or remote format, boards and commissions is on there, and some other details about just kind of how you guys operate. I plan to come to the council either to slip in after your break in the spring or before you go on break for the summer. There's a couple public meeting things I'd like to bring to you for your discussion, and then I'd like to see if you want to have a discussion about council reimbursements for your costs. So does that sound good if we talk about that a little bit today and then move on? Okay. So public meetings, this one's quick. Public meetings had a reworking in the statutes I think 2 years ago, and then the administrative rules were passed, the corresponding administrative rules were passed in the fall. That had to do with upping the enforcement for public meetings. Now all public meetings are enforced by OGEC, which is the Government Ethics Commission. Those are the same folks who do ethics, obviously, in your SEI filing. So you'll see, like on the website, Allison's gonna post, like, here's the grievance procedure. If someone thinks that the city has conducted a public meeting, you know, not consistent with the rules, then they can file a grievance that goes through OGEC. You could potentially be fined. The city would have to then cure whatever the problem is or respond to why we think we didn't violate the rules. So there's like kind of a whole process there. And then another issue with public meetings is executive sessions. So if you recall, executive sessions are your meetings that are close to the public. You go into executive session only for particular statutory reasons. Generally, you guys, it's real property, transactions, personnel issues, labor negotiations, those kinds of things. Media can come to executive sessions, as you know, but you don't make a decision in executive session and they're not supposed to report out what they learn in executive session. Generally, meetings now are in a hybrid format, meaning that we're supposed to use technology to allow the public to view meeting like we're streaming today, except executive sessions are not part of that. So you can have executive sessions and not stream it. But what OGEC has determined is if you do allow people to participate remotely, like if a counselor is out of town or staff is remote and they remote in, then the media could remote in. And if the media remotes in, you know, some jurisdictions kind of think about this and they're like, you know, I don't know where those people are when they're remoting in.
You know what I mean? Like, are there kids running around? Are there, like, what's going on, you know? And so some jurisdictions have said, hey, if we're gonna have an executive session, we're all gonna be in the room together. Because also you think about it, you're not taking, you know, you're giving direction, right? But you're not taking action. That always comes out in the regular meeting. And if we do that, then if the media wants to attend, they have to actually be here. They don't get a blink. They don't show up, you know, like later, bug Allison and be like, hey, how can I attend the meeting? So I'd like the council to consider that we would change these rules a bit to say executive sessions are in person. Or they could be all remote, I suppose, but then you have to let people in, you have to let the media in. But, you know, if a counselor's gonna be out of town, I know often you can appear, but for an executive session, it does sort of add a layer of, you know, with the media and administratively that maybe outweighs the idea that a counselor is gonna show up to one executive session that they happen to miss. You know, we don't have a lot of these anyway, like,
So,
but something to think about.
yeah, so, okay, so we need to give you feedback to say, should we incorporate making executive session in person only? You know, and knowing that the implication of that is if somebody's out of town, they're gonna have to skip the executive session. Okay, is people good with that?
I absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just, we really appreciate not having an ad hoc approach to that because then like Allison's like trying to figure out like, oh, I gotta like get a link to this meeting. It just becomes kind of complex, so.
And that's gonna be reflected in the revision to the rules. So I think we're good with that.
Okay, great.
How do you determine, excuse me, but how do you determine who's actually media or not?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So we generally have, you know, there's a Chronicle and the RG reporters that generally come in, but there is a process in our rules about quote, new media, right? That could be media that is, has a blog or somehow reports online. We don't have a lot of teeth, but we do have a form and we do have a way to say, hey, are you really media? Like, can you show me something you've done? Or can you know, like, what are you doing? And then that can be like, okay, this person is media. Frankly, if someone were to show up, and that's why this is kind of important for an executive session and say, I'm media, they fill out the form, we think, eye roll, this person really isn't media. But really our choices are you stop the meeting and reschedule, or you just let them in anyway. So we don't have a lot of teeth with regard to media at public meetings. That's been a strong part of Oregon public records and meetings law for a long time. So that's what we have.
Create a specific like process?
We have the process, but what I'm saying is the process just leads to them saying, yes, I'm media, and us having to kind of take their certification. Like, we don't have a lot of ability to exclude somebody if we don't think their media credentials are sufficient.
Because of state laws.
Yeah.
And is it also because media has changed so much because?
Yeah,
there's
it
a
used to
blog
be,
for-
you know, you knew who that person was, but
Like
now people come in, and particularly with a remote meeting or hybrid meeting format, someone might log in and you're like, who's that, you know, or what's going on there? But media is really fragmented. They could be reaching people, you know what I mean? It's just
So if we
changed.
feel like if we're uncomfortable with the person who's saying that they're media, we can say, we're gonna call this, we're gonna not have this meeting. And then that gives you an opportunity to actually verify.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And that's the most likely outcome that would be, like, if we had a topic that was super sensitive, right? And we weren't sure this person was media and staff needed more time, you know, then
Okay.
reschedule.
Excellent.
I think the only other thing was just making sure we have a quorum in advance, because if we have two or more counselors out of town for that, and
Yes.
Normally what happens, we don't usually run into that. Normally what people are doing is they're sort of texting me saying, hey, I can be there, or I can't be there, or I've got a thing, right? You've already done that, like, and I'm kind of keeping a head count of, you know, and communicating with the city manager, with Nancy and Neil about it. And if we run into a problem at that point, we'll figure it out. So just the best thing to do is if you run into a scheduling problem, just let me or Nancy know as soon as you can. And then, you know, if we run into that problem, we run into that problem.
Yeah, and it's just executive sessions, you know, if you happen to be out of town and you got a regular night, that's a work session and it's a regular meeting, like, Zoom is great.
Yeah, those changes aren't gonna
Yeah.
impact the discretion we've had the last couple of years, which is if you're out of town, right, you can just log on, just let us know so we can look for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other thing related to public meetings, very brief though, is there's now a training requirement for elected and appointed officials to attend the OGEC training once per term. So it's not annual, it's once per your term. And if you're on more than one appointed board, you only have to do the training once. So you don't have to like double up. So, because I know you're in lots of committees, so that could be like one time. It's just the council, in our case, it's not a statutory requirement anyway, like for other BCCs to do it, but they could. There's a webinar, and then we talked at a agenda review. You can have trainers from OGEC come to your jurisdiction. So we were gonna look and see if we could have that in a way that's in a work session, then you all could come and other people like staff liaisons and BCCs and those folks could also attend that training event. But it's public meetings training. So anyway, another requirement for,
Preparation, it's 2.5.
and it is
Oh.
2.5 hours.
Very fast.
And how often did you say?
It's a term.
I'm probably tired of complaints, so like people need to know how to behave in meetings. We're taking it on the road.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was council reimbursements. That's part of your operating policies and what we could discuss later in the spring. So just to kind of back up a little bit, the charter says that the council does not get compensated, but it can quote prescribe a plan for reimbursements for doing your work as a counselor. So currently in your rules, you have provisions for mileage reimbursement, cell phone and internet reimbursement at a set amount, and then also conference and training reimbursement. So what I'd like to see is if there's interest in having a discussion in a work session about adjusting some of those levels, thinking about maybe there are other costs there that could be accounted for reimbursement, something to think about. And if the process is really workable for you, does it make sense? And I know we're really like real in the weed stuff, but would the council prefer to have a set stipend or allowance for something? Or are they like, no, I'm good with turning in my sheets for mileage or for training or whatever? And I think that would be helpful for me as trying to kind of frame that conversation up for you to get an idea of the kind of costs you do incur. I mean, I think I know from these rules, some of them, and looking what other jurisdictions do, but also I don't really know. I'm sure there's stuff I don't know. So I guess as a first question, does that sound good to have a conversation about reimbursements? I mean, I know that Counselor Doyle is looking to.
I've been asking this every year.
Yeah, so happy to do it. And then,
So, and now would be a chance to give her a little bit of direction about what to prepare for. So like giving her something more than just, hey, let's have a longer conversation about reimbursement, right? It would be, helpful to go, okay, what actually, what are folks actually thinking or some more thoughts about it? Because I think the cell phone reimbursement and internet reimbursement since before I was on council, like, so like one example I will give you is like, I would be open to both to collapsing them into one and finding a way where the costs naturally grow in the operating procedure so we don't have to, so that we don't have to do this, right? That was written in a day when you had a cell phone and and internet. So like, obviously modernizing it is good, but keeping it kind of up to date would be helpful.
okay, so conversation about cell phone and internet. Is the cell phone like a cell phone for the actual device? Or is it your bill for your cell phone bill?
No, I think it's for,
Or
I
either.
think it's for the actual, I think it's for the actual device in that case, right? But I think just streamlining them together so that you've got one set, you're getting one stipend around all the stuff that you need to carry to sort of communicate with the mothership here at City Hall.
You're not bringing in like your cell phone bill every month and
No,
your
no.
internet bill every month and your,
But I guess stipend for cell phone internet together.
yeah.
Yeah.
So-
And
Technology, maybe technology stipend.
And I think, that would be a good way to put it. And I think that the broader question, and you guys can take it away, is the way the language is written, you can ask for a city issue cell phone. I don't know that anybody does that,
Right.
right? But, right, that could be something that could potentially, that could potentially come out. And I think broadly, my opinion is I would like to move us away from month-to-month mileage, reports. What a pain that is for everybody.
Yep.
And,
Forget about half the meetings that you went to that during the week.
Yeah. Can I
I
ask
got
about
sitting
your
at 6 calendars.
transportation? I was curious about this. I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, they probably drive a lot, like from their house or from here to Eugene, right? Because you got meetings all the time. I mean, I'm assuming you got meetings in Eugene or you might have constituent meetings around town, right? Or you would have other places where that's more like local travel, which would be a real pain to try and be like, okay, now I gotta write down that I drove 7 miles to whatever and like that's hard to do. And frankly, also as an it can be administratively tricky too to be doing that, but that's one type of travel you do. And then maybe you have another type of travel that might be like if you're going to the LOC conference in Bend, right? Like a longer, right? Or something, I don't know. It's like a longer travel that is related to your work as a counselor, but not the kind of day-to-day stuff you're doing. Is that fair to say, or am I off base on that? Because there might be a situation where you have a allowance for travel, right? That,
In the metro area.
yeah, that's for your more stuff, right? That you're doing all the time. And then you can still get reimbursed, right? If you're gonna travel far to go to do something that might be outside of the jurisdiction, doesn't happen as often, but you could still get reimbursed for that stuff. And that could be a separate. What do you think?
My question is centered not so much around the mileage, but around the time. And I think that that's the conversation we should be having. Because I might only get 8.4 miles from my house to here and back, but I go to the sub meeting and it was from 4 PM till almost 8.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that we need a consideration on the amount of time that is incorporated in the tasks that we are asked to do,
So
depending on.
not travel time, time spent actually
Time
at
in
the
general,
meeting.
yes, I
Okay.
mean, I think everyone in this room can say that they've spent anywhere from 15 to 20 hours a week probably doing this job. If you're meeting with people, if you're taking phone calls, if you're doing research, if we're truly doing our job, reading that agenda and coming in with questions, we're spending time.
Mhm.
So that for me is the issue. Because of that time, and this is just me, and I know that Counselor Piscineri also, I've lost literally $1,000 a month because of the job that I was able to do before that I couldn't do. And I watched the time and I've looked at my taxes to see how it's whittled down. So I think that that's the conversation I'd like to have is around time to where it's an average of what we're spending.
So I don't know, I will look, to kind of quantify that time, to me, that's sounding more like someone would consider that compensation.
Well,
I
I mean, that's
wonder if
always
there's a-
been my,
Yeah,
that's
which I
always
know
been
should-
my debate is that I feel like that it is something that could go to the voters and that they would support us on that. And that's where I've been told that that's not something that we're willing to entertain right now. So now we're looking at this. So I'm just saying that that's been my big issue is around time.
Okay. Are there other go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think I was gonna ask the same question. You asked your question.
Just the other costs, time, other things like, I don't know, daycare, like
Yeah.
childcare.
I'll just say childcare, for
Okay.
example.
There
I
you
got
go.
5 and they're great and they're wonderful. And during the day, I mean, this is a personal note, but I'm happy to share with you all. My wife has chosen to pump her milk for our baby because the baby's unable to breastfeed, just some genetic issue. Okay, that means she is literally taking away 8 hours during her day to produce that. And so we have childcare come in and help us.
Mhm.
In addition, she's nearly about to crucify me for being here because I got 5 sick children at home. So there is a very real human cost to that. And that said, I also respect, I'm not saying I'm special for having children because I know all of us have various other obligations at home, and I don't want to begin to say one thing is better than another, but yeah, that cost, is it compensation or is it care? Is it, other responsibilities that we have
I think
that are
you
taken
could,
away from that?
yeah, I mean, you might think like the reimbursement of the cost, right? Like if it's childcare or caretaking, let's say you have
Yeah.
some kind of caretaking responsibility. You gotta come down here Monday night for 3 hours,
Sure.
right? Then you're paying you know, 3 hours of time that you would be doing your, I mean, you'd be like doing it. And so I think it's that kind of, the attributable to those costs that you're incurring.
Right.
Because you're headed, you know, because you're coming here and doing
And so
it.
are you talking about like a general, like an average, so someone that would be considered part of that reimbursement? So the reimbursement would be like this fee and it covers these things, whether it's childcare or travel or whatever. Is that what we're talking about for
I'm
reimbursement?
thinking,
Because
the way this is kind of framing up, I'm thinking is there's probably gonna be an allowance, right? Well, I'll just call it an allowance for tech. It would be a set amount that you could do whatever you want with, but that's
Okay.
supposed to go to that.
that's what you
You'd
mean.
probably have a set amount. We could look at a set amount for local travel. That might be more really, you know, that might be a little easier to administer than you trying to keep track of your, like, driving back and forth.
Yeah, I didn't know doing it until this year.
And then,
It was just
Yeah,
too.
Right.
I'm surprised. I texted her the other day and
Yeah.
I was like, I've never seen one of these. Have you been doing it?
yeah, and then clarifying
Just more time.
big travel, like, you know, kind of like someone would at work if they're going to a conference.
Like when we went up to Salem.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of stuff. And then I'm seeing like 3 buckets and then potentially also caretaking, you know, that to me is more like I don't think that would be a set amount. To me, that might make more sense to be like, I'm keeping track of when I did need childcare or when I did need caretaking to fill in for me when I was at a meeting.
Right.
I think that one might lend itself to more, but I can look at that more. So I think what I'm gonna do is come to you with options and say, here's how I think you could structure this. And then we write the rules to accurately reflect that. And then we get a process through city manager's office that lets you run with it. And then it can change too.
2 questions. One is real, I hope simple. I barely use my iPad, my city issued one, so I'd be I don't know if I think I can sign in on Zoom on my laptop for a city event. So I would much prefer a technology stipend, and I would be happy not to have the iPad.
That, absolutely, that's what I did. That's
Yeah.
what a lot of us have done.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I mean, if I can.
I use my laptop, I bought a
Yeah.
laptop specific for city council and stuff, and so or for like my work, so that it's secure.
Okay.
But I mean, that iPad was a
Yeah.
pain in the butt. It really was.
And obviously, there's an IT conversation about that to make sure that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, technology, yeah.
And then the other one was, this is, please forgive me, it's a little random, but, is it possible, what is the minimum number of hours a city employee has to work to be able to be on the city's health insurance plan?
I think part-time employees can be on the city's health insurance plan, I believe, but I don't know that for sure.
And again, going just one step further,
Uh-huh.
hypothetically, since we are doing at least as many hours as many of the part-time employees, is it possible that within our reimbursement structure, we could have an opportunity to buy into that plan?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So that brings up another issue related to your reimbursements and compensation. There's a government ethics issue
Sure.
related to that. That's concept that you can't, and I know this is where we really kind of lose the thread on ethics. It gets a little particular here, but you're not supposed to be able to benefit yourself or vote for a benefit for yourself for being a counselor. So that's that concept of if we were to do a change to your reimbursements or a change to your compensation, you would most likely, I would recommend you declare a potential conflict of interest, and then whatever that compensation or increase would not take effect until you've had an intervening election. And then the other part of, so that's one, and then part 2 is trying to design a reimbursement structure that doesn't have to come back to the council for approval every year. Because it's like, kind of, you know what I mean? Now you're like, oh my gosh, all I want to do is like the CPI or whatever is this, and now we all have to have this like big process about it.
I think you've got to do that, like, if we're gonna go through the changes and start the clock and do all that kind of stuff, I think you've got to do the self-updating numbers, but go ahead, Victoria.
So the one thing that I will point out when it comes to the charter is that I believe that we could go to the voters and change the language of the charter, which is not asking the community for money. It's saying, we need to open this up so that we have the opportunity to discuss this. And then we could assign a group that's part of the community that comes in and says, let's look at what we think our counselor should be paid. But then it takes it away from that, having to go to the voters and try to explain something complicated that makes them, oftentimes we look at it and go, I'm not giving money for that, you know what I mean? Just going in and saying the language has got us locked in.
Yeah.
And we are not able to stay competitive. We're shutting the door on people who may want to, run for council that can't afford to do that, aren't willing to do that because of that. And it may provide more opportunity so that we're not having single candidate runs. I'd love to see 4 or 5 people running in the same ward, for some competition. So anyway, I'm just saying that we could approach the problem that we're having, thank you, Mr. Morissette, to change the language only that says we're gonna remove this language and here's why. And so,
I think when and if the council's ready to look at that in more detail, there's lots of communities that have handled this differently. Like you said, they have a committee that looks at different amounts and then they have a recommendation, they have, they do it themselves, they have other ways. So there's lots of ways to look at that issue, but having that in the charter is what really prohibits the compensation or the kind of the time conversation that the work you do, that being compensation, and then the benefits is really considered part of that compensation.
To Alan's point, and we've had counselors in the past that have had serious health, sort of health issues. Is the health insurance, could we separate the health clinic from the health insurance? Meaning, maybe we don't buy into the health clinic.
Or we could use the clinic.
Yeah, but we could use the clinic. And when I think about, councils over the last 20 years, right, there's definitely been people that would have benefited from that. And that's 100% a city sort of controlled,
That I don't know. Let me look at that.
I can't imagine anybody not wanting to support that.
Well, yeah, right, but like, that's why we gotta, I mean, if we could take that tangible step, I think it would help, a lot of folks. What about other expenses people have? That they're, like, I know Victoria brought up the time, we've got brought up babysitting.
I know this
people.
sounds weird, but like office supplies, dry cleaning. Stuff, I don't, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know who does dry cleaning anymore, but do you know what I'm saying? Like stuff you need to if you're gonna think about, like, if you're gonna meet with a constituent, or you're gonna go to that HOA meeting, or you're gonna come here, like,
What have a dress code?
where's the, we don't have dress code.
This is Springfield. Why would I think that?
I think
It's like one dry cleaner in town, I don't even know.
I think asking the question about, I see some, like, when I think about costs, right, I see some people turn in lunches every once in a while, right, for specific meetings and things like that. So I think just asking that set of costs, because I know a couple boards require money to go, for lunch.
So lunches, like, that would be like if you go into a chamber, whatever, or I don't know, and
Well, what about when we meet with people? Like, I met with Tom
Yeah.
Seaver and I paid for, I didn't even think about it. I just said,
Yeah.
I got you. 'cause you
constituent
met
stuff
me.
or staff stuff, like having copies.
Okay.
I would just say, we have to be really careful about that.
Yeah.
Really careful,
Yeah,
because
$25.
that is a taxable benefit.
We're giving you all the ideas, knowing that you guys are gonna sort of self-sort,
cautions.
right, like.
What's that?
Yeah.
One or the other.
Like, the other big expense, like I have, right, like as I drain my PTO bank, right?
Yes.
And I don't know, that may be the question that, Victoria has, but I'm just giving you all the like, yeah.
Yeah, because I have to take
Yeah.
vacation time a
Well,
lot of
that's the
times to
time.
do stuff. That's what I
Yeah.
did for the day in Salem.
Yeah, and it may just be, we're all starting a conversation here and, Mary Bridget's gonna sort of self-sort lists, about, hey,
Yeah.
like we can kind of get at this from, this goes into one conversation, this goes into the updated, compensation conversation.
Your League of Oregon City, one thing I saw with other cities was their League of Oregon City membership is something that's covered, that's paid for, and then the conference. I forget how you guys work the League of Oregon City stuff.
It was. We send people,
Yeah,
but I
right.
don't know how somehow Allison makes the money work. I
Okay,
couldn't
so
tell
you
you
go,
how to.
okay.
We have a city membership,
For a scholarship.
but when it comes to going to the conference, that's not part of the membership. That's a cost over and above. I don't go to the League of Oregon Cities conference because it's just, there's time and.
Are there other there's the mayors,
Yeah,
whatever, mayors association.
yeah, but the
mayor-
city, pays my mayor's association fees and, you know, if I go to the conference, the money for the conference. So we have a,
Still behave.
we have a pretty good system for, you know, I think for that.
Okay.
But I think you may have these tiers about what could you get into, just sort of like lump sum,
Yeah, that's
low
what I was
administrative
Yeah,
effort type stuff, and then what is sort of ad hoc,
okay.
you know, one on, like, I think that's probably a reasonable split to it. If we could just get to the point where I don't have to do a mileage for it,
Yes.
right, like
If
it,
you have like a flat, like $300 a month is this is a reimbursement and it covers these things, then no, whether you go up or you go down from that, that would be the flat fee that you get. I think that would be a
That's what I'm
great,
thinking.
that'd be a great.
It
call.
might be divided up into tech and transportation or something, but that's, I think an idea that you get an allowance that you can just deal with is, it's acceptable for reimbursement. And it just might be something that makes it easier for people to really do and administratively make happen, so. Okay, so I'm thinking I'll look at the calendar and I'll see if I can slip in either after your spring break or right before you go on break. Probably be a work session and then a regular session is where you, will vote on it.
Okay, so it's something that we could actually implement by the fall. is what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
saying.
No, we'll do it in the spring, because we do an
Thank
annual
you.
look at your rules, so it's coming to you one way or the other. Yeah.
Thank you all for having this conversation.
All right.
Now maybe I'll shut up about it. I'll come up with something else I can bug you about.
One more thing, if there's ever anything in here that you don't like or you have questions about, I mean, these are your rules and we look at them yearly. So feel free to call me or Christina and be like, I don't like that, you know, or whatever. We can address it. This is
that's a
your,
good, we're running a little bit ahead here, so that's a good open question people have is, does somebody have a question specific to the rules or how we operate, like, never just touches them, you know, annually.
yeah, if there's something where you're just like, that is so dumb. I've always hated that, or why do you do that? We can, talk about that and then, oh, yes.
On the consent calendar, just making sure that if there's one item on the consent calendar that I want to call out for later discussion, instead of just, you know, wrapping it up with the consent calendar. Am I reading it correctly that I could just, any member of the council could just say, hey, such a contract,
Yeah.
I'd like to pull that contract, and then we talk about it later, okay?
Over,
Okay.
like, you know, and it's just simple, like, it can, in my experience, it's just happened, like, walking up, well, before the meeting, it has come up and said, I wanna pull 1D, and when she makes the motion, she'll say, we pull 1D, and then whatever 1D is, immediately after we're done with the consent calendar, they'll bring the staff up and we'll talk about.
I'm really good at that motion. I do it all the time in LTD.
Yeah.
Ah.
If you had that choice, you could, then the council could be like, all right, yeah, we're good here, let's let's vote for it, or they could be like, send it back to, do X.
But I have no problem if I have a process for doing it, and that's just tell Michelle, great, I love it.
The other thing I'm gonna do is back to the public meetings. I'd like to, I'm gonna provide some more legal advice about those changes. I think what I'd like to do too, the mayor had recommended that I just reach out to you all and just say, hey, do you have any questions about public meetings? Or is there something about meetings that you've always been like, I don't get this, why do we do this? And then I'm gonna see if there's any themes there and try and get some written advice out to you or other advice where, so we can, I know it's always just an area that seems fraught. You're sort of like, can I talk about this? Can I not talk about this? What are we doing? And if there's not, then you're good. But just something to be thinking about with meetings and records and all the stuff you gotta be careful to do or not do. I think it adds up over time. So, I'm gonna try and do that probably starting in March.
So I have a couple things.
Sure.
One is a process opinion.
Mhm.
And one is just sort of a process clarification. One is, in terms of Robert's rules, we always skip over, any sort of conversation to the motion.
Yeah.
And that bugs me, not to pick on you, but we usually I make a motion, I second it, and there usually should be discussion to the motion, and we
Exactly.
always skip over that. And I'm like, that's a piece that I'm like, could we level up a little bit? That's an opinion about how to operate.
We're in the safe zone here, so if.
Oh, I can't agree more.
The other proposal that I would like to make, I'm just thinking of in my time on council and how we've tried to level up in so many ways. In public meetings, it would feel better for me if we referred to people as counselor so-and-so and counselor so-and-so than by first name. There's something about that just doesn't feel as professional, or that we're able to have these conversations in a way. And it doesn't have to be if we're in work sessions or whatever. It's just I feel like we should maybe it should be counselor so-and-so. It's like we try to do that in CETA to say board member so-and-so to separate them out. And so those are just these pieces that I've been like, it's just been like poking at me that I'm like, oh, I feel like if we leveled it up a little bit.
Like, it's gone back and forth over the years.
We
Like,
often
when
use the first name and I'm like.
if we used to, if we were in the, when we had work sessions in the Jesse May room, there was a easier sort of shift. If people want to go to a mechanic like that,
I
like,
just thought it was required. I always thought you had to say counselor so-and-so, because I'll catch myself starting to say, counselor so.
Well, and it's an opinion. It's like, I'm just proposing it. It's like, I feel like it'd be a nice way to level up. Yeah.
But to your point about the discussion, we always have the discussion before the motions are made
Yeah.
and seconded, so that's like a. For
It is,
me, a
yeah.
procedure,
It
right?
would be, and it is more common to do the to motion the second, and then that enables the discussion, right? Then that's like, okay, we had two people here are up for this, so now we can talk about it. I don't know why this council has always done that, but we could switch.
To keep doing it, it's fine. It just
Yeah.
always feels like this, like.
Well, it's kind of like there's no, it is a little weird sometimes after that second, then it's just like boom, and you're like, oh, but maybe someone would be like, hey.
And that happened the other night. I brought up an issue that I had with one of the items on the agenda thing, and then the budget, and then we did the motion the second, and I was like, wait a second, I wanted,
Yeah.
I had this, wanted maybe
There was
pull
no
that
room for that
particular thing, and I didn't
Yeah.
feel like I even had that
It's
opportunity.
the
So-
ability to get out on the floor,
Appreciate
what you're in a more, sometimes when you're having that discussion, it's a little back and forth.
Mhm.
And then you can be, have that opportunity to say, hey, this is where I'm coming from on this, blah, 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 and then do the vote.
so, okay, so maybe, like, honestly, I'm looking when we've always done it this way, doesn't mean we have to always keep doing it that way. Normally, when we've talked, we've kind of reached some sort of, kind of consensus about what we're going to do, and, and the motion kind of gets formed from there. I'm looking for people to sort of raise, and maybe we just have to make that a little bit more explicit. Because, sometimes people can jump in there and say, hey, I got more to say here now that we've actually formed the motion. So it might just be a little, we gotta do it I gotta do it in a little bit more explicit of a way to say, okay, we talked, we kind of discussed the issue, we kind of got to a motion, right? Now that we got a motion, does anybody else, do we want to dive into it?
Yeah, you could do, because you do, it right, I'm trying to think, I've watched it a million times, I'm like, okay, what do they do? Okay, so they do a motion, and then you call for the second, right? I mean, that's a simple, any discussion,
Yeah.
Any more discussion to the motion?
and then that can let people kind of get something on the record, or if they, sometimes you hear the motion and you're like, oh, no, or it's okay, or something.
Yeah, because I may not have voted no if I'd been
Yeah.
able to have,
Mhm.
I couldn't agree with that.
Around the motion,
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, and this is why it's good to talk about it, because if you ask me what's going on in my brain, I'm assuming everybody knows and nobody's got anything, right? Like,
Yeah, and I actually was gonna make a comment. We went to, I think, Ellen on another part of the budget, but I was gonna make a comment about the task force amount. And then it was motioned, and at that point, I felt like that I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
That we're voting. And I knew where my vote was at, but I had a kind of a clarifying, or just to kind of back up what you had said, that I wasn't aware of that until I saw it on that supplemental budget.
okay, so I hear two kind of distinct things here, right? And ask for a more explicit, hey, does anybody else have, you want to jump in specific to the motion, right? Like I'm hearing kind of this conversation about like, hey, us talking about it is fine, right? To sort of, and asking clarifying questions, but once we form the motion, having a moment to go, just double check with everybody. And then I think there's another piece, which is as a group, right? If we always are in a position to slow down and have conversations. And my sense of it is if people want more time, right? Like this thing goes as fast as what we want it to go. So if you want to say, hey, I got more questions, right? We're going to talk about it as long as people kind of reasonably want to talk about it. And as we think about it as a group, I just need people's help to say, if you're feeling like we're rushing past something and you got another question you want to ask, then we'll slow down a little bit.
Unless there's another meeting right behind it and we're pushing up against the clock.
And I hate that.
I hate being pushed to make a decision, especially if numbers are involved. And if we have like another meeting or another item on the agenda, I would rather vote no and get another minute, or actually I'd rather move the table, the motion until another day or postpone the motion,
Okay,
you know what I mean?
so let's. See, you set us up perfectly for this. We were gonna run into these types of
It's
things.
11:26. I mean, CETA, it's good or not good.
No, it's that, I think it's the same conversation, right? Which is, hey, if you want more time, or if you want more questions, right? Like, we're in the driver's seat through this whole experience, right? Like Gamma, watching the climb and watching the agenda, but like as a group, right? We don't wanna get ourselves, in a position where we're just rushing through stuff and your comfort levels are up there. That doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It just means that like, hey, I still had something to say.
Yeah, but you could solve that by doing exactly what counselor.
You don't have to say it here, but I'm like, in formal meetings,
But
I'm
like
like,
it is,
say
that you
that.
make the motion, you second, and then you have the conversation. If you did it that way, then we wouldn't have to worry about this. Cause then you could like. Fix it.
Just Roberts, straight over.
Exactly, that's to me,
It always feels
seems
like-
like what we should do.
I forgot that piece.
Follow Robert's.
So, and go to one other point you're bringing up, and then I'll come back to this, which is, there's some stuff that statutorily has to move. Okay, and I'm thinking budgets is probably the one thing,
You
right?
can't punt the budget. I mean, you can vote no on it if you don't agree with it, but we have to, because of the timing and publishing and all of that. Is one thing.
So I think to your point, where if you want more time with something, I think the question is, back to, hey, is there any, like, some things we can wait, right?
Right.
But
I mean, for the case of a budget, most of the time I can resolve my questions ahead of time by a quick phone call. Like, that's not a problem for me. And if I have a problem with it, I would raise a stink about it, right? I would just say, can we pull that item out and have a longer discussion? That's fine. I think I'm just, especially when we're gonna end up talking about some of the real big things in the near future. That's where I'm concerned about being pushed to make a decision on certain things if we haven't had enough time. Or, do we refer a matter to a committee? Do we refer a matter to, whatever it is to make a decision? Those are the opportunities that I think as council, if I'm, and I don't wanna speak for Councilor Doyle, but like feeling a little more comfort to be able to slow things down is a good thing, even if I can't necessarily make the right motion all the time. Or I might have to ask for a parliamentarian to help me slow down, or just say, I need more time on this.
well, the good news is we packed a parliamentarian,
Oh, good.
right? That's a city attorney, so we can work through, we can work through anything. And I am writing down that explicit check with people, right? Like, which is good. But I think the thing I want to walk away from the conversation with is like, if you have more to say, right? Then I'm telling you, we need to make time, we need to make room to sort of say it, right? Like I got the question about, hey, when we get the motion, be a little bit more explicit about that. That's great feedback. But I think that we all have to kind of own that as a group, right? To say, if you've got more to say, we need you to say it. That's why we're all here.
I think what I hear you saying is that you're not willing to talk about changing it to what we were just talking about, which several of us have said we would prefer to go to the other style of not having the conversation first, having the motion and then the second, and then have the conversation. So I just want to clarify, like it sounds like you're taking that.
Conversation to get to the motion.
Well,
Yeah,
like,
keep it-
the general conversation, like, do we have questions about this report or whatever? But when we get to this, which I think is, we're saying the same thing, like, we get to a specific motion, there are pieces in that motion that we may be like you were talking about the other night, where you're like, wait, I want to talk about this specific thing about this motion, not the general. So it's a both and, like, I see that Sean wants us to work out all the pieces, but I'm like, but I also want us to be able to talk specifically to the motion.
Okay, you hear me explicitly saying I'm willing to change how we're doing here, right? Okay, because I think that's what we're sort of working to. If you want to go to something more rigid, right, which would be like, hey, Michelle reads the motion, we second it, and then we have the staff report. I mean, that we could go to a more rigid approach if that would make sense. Honestly, I don't care.
I
I
think it's
just-
both and, like, we want this.
Yeah, I don't think
first.
there's. Staff report should go.
Yeah, so you're having questions, so it sounds like the item comes up, staff is there, talking questions. It's kind of narrow, you kind of, like, it's getting there, then there's a motion, then there's a second, And then the person presiding the meeting, usually the mayor will say, all right, any discussion? And then that's where you can shift from, you could still ask questions, obviously, 'cause- but then you shift more to statements and discussion,
Yeah,
deliberation.
in my mind, if we are following that kind of path, and that's why I'm saying we're, you know, that people are asking for a change, like maybe 95% of the time, by the time we get through that first part, everybody's gonna be fine anyway, right?
Yeah, there might not be discussion
Yeah,
too much,
but
but we want
asking-
that pin.
But asking that broader question, well, so you're good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a really quick time check. We probably need to start wrapping this up in about a minute or two.
So I want to ask a clarification question back to Counselor Rodley's question around how our elected officials address themselves when you're sitting on a dais. We have a beautiful new, hearing room and a beautiful professional dais. Can we maybe agree that when you're sitting there, you refer to each other by counselor or mayor or what? The mayor will say that I am old school, and in this particular instance, I am, because I believe that you are, I will always refer to you that way. It doesn't matter where I see you, because I believe you should be afforded that respect as elected officials. And there's something about having that mental, it's like when you're overdressed for an event, right? You just up in your game a little bit. So.
Well, and I was having this conversation with people in other jurisdictions, and we were talking about this specifically and talking about how it can also help to sort of elevate the conversation. So it doesn't feel so personal, it doesn't feel so, because when we're like, hey, buddy, it can, and this just elevates it to like a very, like, we know our stuff, we're in charge of the city, we're doing the thing. And maybe not, yeah.
And also, that's what I'm used to. This is the first time I've come and worked with an elected body where they did refer to each other by their first name I was like, ooh, but I was like, okay, well, I guess that's a norm. I'm not gonna shape up, so.
So in the interest of, is there any other topics that we need to discuss on your?
Me, I got my documents, thank you.
Okay, so my understanding is we need to,
Adjourn the council portion of it.
We're adjourning the council portion of the meeting.